Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another live stream. Let me know if the audio, visuals, everything's working fine. In fact, let me check for myself. Yup, looks like everything is alright. Alright, welcome back to another live stream. Today we will be continuing our tier list of the good old Roman emperors. Hello, Dennis. Good to see you here. It'll take a bit for everybody else to file in. Alright, good. Everything sounds good. Yes, so today we'll be finishing our tier list that we started in the last stream. I think last time we took about 4 hours to rank half of the Roman emperors. I'm hoping we don't take that long today. Those of you who are watching the VOD afterwards, you'll see at the bottom of the screen how long did this take. I'm hoping a little less than 4 hours long. Hey, hello everybody, Benny Roy Dean. Rome ended with Diocletian, don't at me. Ooh, I mean, I disagree with that, and you're going to find a lot of people in this community that do not agree with that opinion, but Rome is a complicated thing. In fact, we'll be talking about the fall of the Western Empire today. And, well, I have some opinions on that. You know, I'm interested to discuss that time period, the so-called fall of the Roman Empire, how it actually fell, and I think it's a little more fuzzy than people generally think, but we frankly got a while to go before we get there. Yeah, thanks, Dennis. That's what y'all are here for. You know, we're here to discuss the Roman emperors, and then someone leaves a comment, and I get distracted with a 20-minute tangent on something maybe a little bit related, or maybe entirely unrelated, frankly. So I think a good way to start this live stream would be to go over the tier list we already have, and that'll give everyone a bit to file in, and also, you know, it's a good reminder for those who didn't watch the first live stream or maybe don't remember it too well, what exactly we did. I'm not gonna relitigate everything we talked about last time, because that would take absolutely ages, but we'll just go through them. And I have a couple of notes here for each emperor we're going to go over this time, though I'm sure we will be pulling up the Wikipedia page to get some more information. The honorable Roman historians said it fell due to barbarian treachery. Yes, well, you know, honorable Roman historians, that's an interesting qualifier to add. Alright. So let's switch over here, and then I think I was a little bit zoomed in last time. How does this look to everybody? Can everybody see what's happening on the screen? Or at least well enough. Yeah, look, it looks pretty good. Alrighty. So, this is the tier list we managed to develop last time. As you can see, today we'll be beginning with Constantine II, which means last time we ended with Constantine the Great. That was sort of one of the points I set. A pretty interesting point to end at. Hello, Shad. Sounds good, Dennis. Roy Dean, I'm not a Roman historian, but I reckon this is because a lot of say back when the empire's stronger, a lot of these early emperors have more statues built, there's more infrastructure done, more construction, versus a lot of the later emperors, first off, might not have had the resources to do that, or second off, a lot of these later emperors are reigning for very short periods of time. They either might not have the resources, they might not have the time to build a bunch of statues of themselves, and you also have to remember that most of what was built or I don't know if most, but a lot of what was built didn't survive. And so for us to have remaining statues of a figure, and that means there must have been a lot of statues. So I think it's due to basically lack of resources over time. Yep. Yeah, and Shad's laying it out as well. Declining economy, like I said, lack of resources. And yes, I think Christianity probably also had something to do with this. You know, I mean, Christianity sort of has a complicated relationship with idols. Even Christian idols, but especially non-Christian idols, you're sort of supposed to be a little lighter on that. You know, you might not want these big, as Shad puts it, godlike statues honoring these pagan, well, not pagan, but these figures who may not be, I don't know, that associated with Christianity. And Roy Dean laments that we don't have a Justinian statue, but, you know, we have a accurate depiction of Justinian, which is from, and I bet Shad will know this, it's from like a fresco or a mural from a Western church, right? A church in Italy that was built around that time, which is pretty rare because, like you said, for a lot of these guys, we just have the coins and then some artistic interpretations. Hey, that's completely fine, Dennis. I mean, look, we all have varying levels of expertise on this, you know what I mean? We've got some real Rome experts in the chat. Shad is here with us. I assume Light will show up at some point. You know, they know a lot. Myself, you know, I know a bit. Rome's an interest of mine, but it's not even my main historical interest. But, I mean, we're here to learn, have fun. Yeah, luckily Epic History TV got that accurate depiction of Justinian. Well, I gotta say, I like whenever we get depictions like that, because it sort of brings him back alive to a certain extent. Yeah. Well, honestly, Dennis, I mean, I've done a bit of reading on Rome, but same with me. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. In terms of like academia, you know, I've discussed before, I do a lot more like 18th century European and American. So I'm far more well read on that. But Rome's also an interest of mine. So let us go through what we already have. We don't need to discuss every single emperor here. I'm just going to sort of briefly go through the tiers we have. So we start with Optimus Princeps, aka our S tier, our top tier. Benny asks, why is Theodora in this list? Well, this list included some of the women who obviously weren't emperors, but played important roles. Also, some of them who ruled in the absence of the emperor. I'm not ranking them. As you can see, I moved them down to the bottom because I don't necessarily think it's comparable, but these are some important figures in the history of Rome. Anyway, S tier, of course, we start with Augustus. You know, Augustus is the top of the S tier. He is the emperor that basically all other emperors would style themselves after. He really set a lot of the precedents that future emperors would follow. He's incredibly important. And not only was he important and influential, but he also had a long, stable, and prosperous reign. You know, everything combined to make him the top-tier emperor. And then, like I said, we don't have to go too much into all of these, but we have Aurelian, you know, saved the empire. Diocletian, someone who I think we put really high, but I like Diocletian. A lot of his ideas didn't necessarily work out in the end, but I think he was someone who was trying to go with the flow, trying to look ahead and see what Rome needed and do that. Trajan, usually seen as when the empire was at its furthest extent, but I know last time we talked about there's arguments being made that the empire was at its furthest extent. I think, was it under Septimius Severus the First, or maybe a little bit later? Yeah, Diocletian did have many successful reforms. Well, of course, some of his, like the Tetrarchy failed in the end. That's probably the one that most people are going to think of. But yes, the empire, or sorry, Diocletian did have a lot of successful reforms. Then we have Constantine the Great. This is who we ended on. Reunifier of the empire, successfully fought a lot of invaders, etc., etc. And then we end with Hadrian. And Benny asks, is Hadrian not a bit too high? I think some people would say that. In my opinion, I think he deserves the top tier. I guess a little bit tricky. I really like Hadrian. He's someone who secured the borders of the empire, toured around the empire, listening to his people, and involving himself in their matters, but in an actually effective way. So I think Hadrian deserves that spot at the bottom of Optimus Princeps, though who knows? Maybe by the end of this, we'll move him down a little bit. I don't know. Next we have Great. Top of Great tier is Gallienus. I think there's an argument to be made that Gallienus could be put in Optimus Princeps. The reason I don't have him up there is I think, to me, he has to be a step down from Aurelian. He sort of laid the groundwork for Aurelian. Gallienus tried his best to put a stop to all this territory slipping away. Now, territory continued to slip, but, like I said, he sort of laid the groundwork for someone like Aurelian to come. And Gallienus was, rushing about the Roman Empire. Yes, I did, Shad. I mentioned that in the Discord, but yeah, I watched that video you recommended on Gallienus. And yeah, Gallienus was good at putting out the major fires. And then we have Marcus Aurelius, Claudius, Probus, and then I'm not necessarily going to go through the rest of them, but you can take a look for yourself who we have in good, then decent, then mediocre. You've got quite a few emperors in mediocre, poor, bad, and I think there are some notable ones. We've got Nero, Elagabalus, and Caracalla in bad. I think a lot of people would rate them much lower. I know we had a bit of a discussion about this last time. But I think the reason that Nero and Elagabalus are, for example, higher than Caligula or Commodus was that, well, I think Nero, frankly, a lot of the sources are over-exaggerated. Now, Nero did commit brutality during his reign. He was certainly not a good emperor, but, there was more of a mix. There were some good policies under Nero. I think Elagabalus, brutal, certainly, committed sort of atrocities in their immediate circle, but I don't think the negative effect on the entire empire was big enough to put them lower. And then Caracalla, I think the only reason Caracalla's in bad is because of the Antonine Constitution, citizenship to all free men. Because Caracalla was a real tyrant. Terrible, sort of not, I don't think many people would debate that. Tiber Fishbait, Commodus, and Didius Julianus. Julianus merely because he purchased the throne. He's been tossed into Tiber Fishbait for that individual reason, which I think is deserved. Come on, man, don't purchase the Roman emperorship. That's not cool at all. And then, sensibly, I think, we have an unrankable tier, And the unrankable tier primarily consists of emperors who ruled for such a short time or did so little that it's really difficult to judge them. And of course, this gets more relevant the later we go in Roman history, because we get so many usurpers. We have emperors reigning for a year, a couple of months, a couple of weeks. We have Caesars, junior emperors. We have co-emperors. We get an influx of a lot of different emperors who may be usurpers or maybe only had a junior position and who really didn't do too much in the possibly weeks they had on the throne. And I reckon we're going to have more unrankables today, frankly. Yeah, Roy Dean, they were already being taxed, my friend. Those non-citizens of the Empire were already getting taxed. So that was not why they were made citizens. But I do think the extension of citizenship was a good idea. Rome was always about adaptability, expanding, bringing new peoples into its culture, and then Romanizing them. So, yeah. Would Julius Caesar rank high or low in terms of being a consul? Well, it's a different question if you're asking about Caesar's consulship, or his earlier on, or I would imagine we'd be ranking Caesar as an emperor type figure, even though he wasn't an emperor. He of course sort of laid the groundwork. But it's a good question. I think you'd have to put Caesar near the top, but you'd have to put him near the top. Caesar had some good populist, reformist policy. So there's a lot of positives there. The people liked Caesar. But I think a lot of the power by the end had sort of gone to Caesar's head, and he was much less graceful than, say, Augustus was, handling the power, handling his position, and people were, became very concerned about that, So I'm not quite sure where you would put Caesar. Of course, it's hard to compare, because he was in a different position than these other guys. But he would be at the top. And, Roy Dean points out Caesar's final planned campaign. Yeah, if it actually occurred, that could have been pretty amazing. But it didn't, so, we don't actually know. You know what I mean? But, of course, Caesar was a very great general, so you probably could have expected good things from him. So, what will we be doing today? We are ranking the rest of these Roman emperors. I know this list includes all of the Byzantine emperors, but we won't be doing that. We will be going to Justinian, though. We're going a little bit past the fall of the West. I know that might be sort of an interesting decision to some of you. I just sort of felt like, Justinian isn't much further than the fall of the West. And, he's such an important figure, and he's also someone who made a real attempt to reunify the empire. He brought back a lot of lost Roman territory, so I think it's fair enough to rank him in this list. I know it's a little unorthodox to bring Justinian into this list, because this, we are basically stopping around the fall of the West. We're just extending a little bit afterwards. Dennis, I would consider ranking the Byzantines one day. Yeah, I definitely would, actually. The only issue is just that, look, Roman Empire, or Roman history is not necessarily my expertise. For a lot of these guys, we had to do the classic look them up and read about them. But I know even less about a lot of these Byzantine emperors. So it's sort of a gap in my knowledge. And I think, frankly, a lot of people know a lot less about most of these guys than they do about most of these guys. So I would consider doing the Byzantine emperors one day. I think it might be a little more difficult than this one, though. And we're getting some split opinions on Justinian already. He's going to be a real interesting one to talk about. And MN, that is correct. Some people do call Justinian the last Roman emperor. We're already having debates about Justinian. Yeah, and one day we might get to 1453. Maybe so, maybe so. Okay, so everyone, refocus. Get your mind off Justinian and the fall of the West, because we're not there yet. We are not there yet. We are picking up. We just did Constantine the Great, who we slapped into S tier. We are picking up in 337 with Constantine the Second. Yes. Dennis points out the History of Byzantium podcast. I haven't listened to all of it because it's incredibly long, but I also enjoy the History of Byzantium, which, for those that don't know, is you had Mike Duncan's History of Rome podcast, and then someone else picked up and continued with History of Byzantium. It's sort of a continuation. Okay, so basically, after Constantine the Great, we have a couple of brothers who rule alongside each other, though, it doesn't necessarily go super well. So we have Constantine II, Constans I, and Constantius II. What a couple of characters. So, Constantine II, like I said, I have a couple of notes for each of these characters, but I'm going to rely on you guys to provide me some more info. So, him and his brothers split the empire amongst themselves. He fought with his brother Constans, lost, and was killed. That is basically Constantine II. Constantine II broke the peace and lost miserably. Yeah, Bogdan, I think that is right. I don't think we can... It's kind of tough because I don't think we have too much about his administration. So we don't really have too much to go on. But he definitely wasn't good. I'm not quite sure if he's fish bait. You have to be truly, truly awful to be fish bait. But he's real bad. And Roydeen, yeah. When Rome splits East and West, we're going to be doing them both. We're doing both Eastern and Western emperors. So I'm thinking Constantine II, maybe bottom of bad, top of terrible. The thing is, he was bad, but to be down here, you have to do some really bad long-term damage to the empire. And while the empire's not going in a good direction, I'm not sure that's due to Constantine II. He was more part of everything. And Benny says unrankable or terrible. I think there's a chance he might be unrankable. Because we really just don't have too much to judge this man on. And yes, Roydeen points out he was bad. We're going to hear this a lot with a lot of these remaining emperors. This is absolutely true. We have a lot of really bad ones. I think I'm going to slap Constantine II at the bottom of bad for now, but we can come back to him later. So then we go to one of the other brothers, Constans I. Now, he remained longer than Constantine II. He defeated Constantine II in battle after they got, all mad at each other. Hello, Light. Light is here. Welcome, welcome. We've just done Constantine II, who we've slapped into bad. Bottom of bad, though there was some debate over whether he should just go into unrankable. for sort of the lack of stuff we have. And now we're moving on to Constans the First. Everyone, focus up, focus up. Reorient yourselves from Honorius and Justinian back to the sons of Constantine the Great. Yeah, I agree with you, Light. All of Constantine's sons are bad, but it's like, how bad? You know what I mean? Because Constans the First is also bad. Not as bad as Constantine the Second, simply because he remained for longer, and he did some successful campaigning. But you really, I mean... I think Constans the First is maybe like top of bad or poor. And Roydin asks, can we knock Constantine down a tier for having bad succession? I think when we rated Constantine, we included succession in the rating. I'll put it that way. And also, I'm inclined to be a little more easy on that because a lot of these emperors had bad succession. You know, like Marcus Aurelius. Yeah, like MN says, most of them suck when it comes to succession. There are exceptions, but a lot of them suck when it comes to succession. Hello, Conquer Von Zap. Sipping and enjoying the debate going on. So I'm thinking Constans the First maybe goes top of bad. I don't think he was too terrible. Maybe even poor, honestly. I'm inclined to put him in poor. He was defeated by Magnentius, who we'll get to a little bit down. Yeah, and like I mentioned, and Light's pointing out, Constans had some successful campaigning, suppressing the Franks, rebellions. So I think Constans can be placed into poor. We'll leave him there. And next we have another of Constantine's sons, Constantius II. Now, we were focusing on the west, now we moved to the east. He was in the east. He defended against Sassanids under Shapur II, defeated Magnentius, fought several usurpers. These are the notes that I have on him. That seems not bad. 337 to 361. Yeah. Constantius was decent, kept the Persians away, but him slaughtering his family is not a good look. Yeah. Not a good look. But it seems like Constantius was fairly capable. Sort of stabilized the empire, as Benny puts it. Defended against the Persians, defended against usurpers, defeated Magnentius, who we talked about. So I'm thinking that Constantius seems better than mediocre. I mean, look, we're discussing all of these points, pros and cons. Seems like a lot more pros and cons. I would say probably middle of decent. I'd be interested to hear some of y'all's arguments. Maybe some of y'all think he should be up a tier higher. He supported Arian heresy, unlike Constans the First. Goodness. Yeah, we are at the point in Roman history. I mean, we just had Constantine the Great with the Edict of Milan. We're at the point of Roman history where now we have a bunch of emperors getting involved in Christian affairs. So we have to, take a look at some of that and judge it. Alright, I think we're leaving our boy Constantius II in decent. And frankly, we're going to have a lot of mediocre to fishbait emperors. You know what I mean? So having someone above, even in or above mediocre is a bit of an achievement. Okay, Shad, we just did Constantius II. That's what we just did. Now we have Vetranio. I'm going to be honest, I don't even know who this is. So we're going to... Soldier, statesman, and co-emperor, native of Moesia. Emperor for a couple of months. Joined himself to the cause of Magnentius, who's now been mentioned several times and we're about to get to. Okay, this seems like a big-time unrankable, I'm gonna be honest. Vetranio, you seem like a big-time unrankable. If anyone has any strong opinions on Vetranio, you know, feel free to give them now. And yes, Roy Dean, we are allowed tangents. We're going to the fall of the West plus Justinian. Vetranio did abdicate peacefully, so there's that. Yeah. I'll do you one better. Who is Vetranio? I don't know who this man is. It seems like Vetranio was a fairly decent fellow, but remember, we are just ranking them on their reigns specifically. And though we have a lot about Vetranio abdicating and why he took up the purple in the first place, you know, I feel like we don't have enough in his reign itself to allow him to escape from unrankable. Now, if we're ranking him as a guy, then maybe he goes into good or something, but we're not ranking him as a guy or as a soldier. We're ranking him as an emperor. And during the several months that he held the position of Augustus, that's what it looks like from Wikipedia, I'm not sure we have enough to bring him out of unrankable. Not during his reign specifically. He's the Washington of his time. Perhaps, though, I think the difference would be that Washington did successfully rule for several years and then stepped away. I just don't think we have enough for Vetranio to actually rank him. Seems like a swell fellow. I'll give him that much. But not enough to rank him as an emperor. Okay, on to Magnentius. A usurper, though. We've got a lot of usurpers at this point. Is the word usurper even meaningful anymore? I'm not quite sure. We've mentioned him a couple of times. He defeated Constans, and then would lose to Constantius. Didn't have any legitimacy, and any policies he passed were then repealed. So once again, remember, we're trying to rank these individuals as emperors, right? So I'm not... Yeah, and Shad points out, only a usurper if they didn't manage to hold on to power. And Roydean says it's not a usurping if you're good. I actually don't think that's true. It's, as Shad puts it, it's not usurping if you hold on to power and gain some sort of legitimacy. That's what really makes the difference at this point between being a usurper and not a usurper. Magnentius held on to power for only a few years, didn't really do much with it. He's a true usurper, and I think one that we might have to slide into unrankable. Or maybe bad. I don't think terrible or Tiber Fishbait, you know. This channel really needs a Discord server. Oh, well, do I have good news for you? Do I have good news for you? There you go. In chat right now, that is the link to the Discord. So if you would like to have more debates about the Roman emperors, etc., then hey, join the Discord. That's true for everybody watching the VOD as well. It's down in the description below. You can join the Discord and talk about it as much as you want. Yeah, we have a lot of conversations about Rome in the Discord. I think I'm going to put Magnentius into bad. But maybe he deserves being unrankable. I'm not quite sure. He's going to go into bad for now. And so, we move on to a real curious character. And I was just talking about with Magnentius. We are rating I was talking about with Vetriano. We are rating these guys as emperors, not overall. And I gotta remind myself that when we're doing bad or good emperors. Now, Julian the Apostate is someone who I have a personal interest in. I think Julian the Apostate is a very curious character, but, I cannot let that bias get in the way of the ranking. So, Julian the Apostate, named as such due to Christian historians and scholars afterwards, right? He was a real curious character. He got I guess what we might today call a classical, but a Greek education. He was a bit of a philosopher. He was also a pagan. Now, if you go back like 100, 200 years, that's completely fine. But nowadays, by nowadays, I mean the mid-300s, being a pagan, that's not good. That's not acceptable, really. So, in 355, this is before he was emperor, he co-ruled Gaul as Caesar, and he was a successful general and administrator in that time. Constantius had named Julian as his successor, and he led his... Now, Betty says he failed miserably in Persia. I think it's a little more complicated than that. And also, you gotta remember that Julian died rather prematurely in a sort of mysterious circumstance. So, there are questions about what exactly could have happened had Julian lived. And there's an argument to be made about, going against the religion of your people. Though I will make the point that, as we'll see throughout sort of the 300s into 400s, Rome is increasingly becoming more Christian, but there are sort of pagan interest groups that will cause problems at times. Yeah. I think Light makes a good point. Had some initial success against the Persians, which is why I think it's a little more complicated than, just total disaster. But was ultimately unsuccessful, and that's a good way to describe Julian as an emperor. I think he's a real interesting character. He was very pro-Roman. He wanted to bring back a lot of the old Roman traditions and culture, and for that I find him interesting. His interest in philosophy and all that kind of stuff. But I think as an emperor, he was sort of... I don't know if I would say out of touch, because, he knew that his ideas were not in the vogue, but he was not in line with everybody else, and in the end, he was ultimately unsuccessful. So I think Julian... Is he mediocre or poor? Where does a interesting emperor with some, I think, interesting ideas, but ultimately quite unsuccessful emperor go? Is that a mediocre emperor or a poor emperor? I think probably more mediocre, in my opinion. Tell me one thing he achieved. I think he had some successful campaigning around the Rhine, and he had a pretty decent administration in Gaul. And while I will make the argument, I know the campaign against the Persians ended badly. It didn't begin so badly. And Light makes, I think, a good point. Julian didn't crash the empire, and I don't think he inflicted permanent damage on the empire. So I think that's probably a mediocre. Well, that was while Julian was Caesar. So it gets a little complicated here, because we have, of course, Caesar and then Augustus. But so far we have been ranking individuals who were only given the Caesar position. Okay, we have a split in the chat between poor or mediocre. I lean towards more mediocre, so I'm gonna put him low mediocre. But I absolutely understand putting him into poor. I do. In my opinion, I think he's low mediocre. And like I said, I think he's a real fascinating character. He's a really interesting guy. He sort of represents a traditional Roman way of doing things. And I think there are interesting questions about what might have happened if he had survived, but we have to look at his reign as it was. And he died pretty soon, and he didn't manage to implement his ideas successfully. All right. Moving on from Julian. Real fascinating guy. Roy Dean is doing things the Roman way, splitting the Senate. Why don't we just go more authoritarian? That'll be sure to solve things, right? Okay. On to Jovian, who was a bodyguard under Julian. He was basically left with the situation after Julian mysteriously died. And so he had to escape with his army after Julian died, and then signed a humiliating peace treaty with the Sassanids. Yeah. So, I mean, Jovian's rule was pretty damn terrible, but I think, to be fair to Jovian, I don't think Jovian has many people advocating for him. He was left with the situation after Julian died. So that's not necessarily his fault, but it still wasn't great. He basically reversed a lot of Julian's acts and policies. He sort of, Julian added more restrictions to Christianity, and he had a very pagan, Greek-oriented court, and Jovian reversed a lot of that. Zod says unrankable. I think there's an argument for unrankable. I think there's an argument for sort of mediocre to poor. I mean, the main thing that Jovian is remembered for, I think, is that treaty with the Sassanids, which was real bad. Dennis is at war with his microwave. But he was victorious! Yeah, somebody should be keeping track of all the peace treaties the Romans and Persians have signed and then gone on to break. Alright, so give me your opinions. What do we think about Jovian? Is he unrankable? Or, if he is rankable, where should he be ranked? I think another, maybe high poor, maybe low mediocre, or maybe unrankable. I mean, he was not in power for very long. I think 8 months, Zod said. Bad peace makes him a bad emperor. I think maybe poor is the place for him. It was a bad peace. But once again, it's not like he bears full responsibility for that. I mean, of course, he has to bear part responsibility. It was him that did it, but... yeah. Emperors in this era had a lot expected of them. And it's not even that they had a lot expected of them. You know, emperors always had a lot expected of them, but they had a million fires to put out. A lot of the emperors, from this point onwards, everything was constantly crumbling around them, and they had to rush to fix things. So unless you're a real exceptional individual, it's pretty difficult to do a good job. Alright, I think poor for Jovian. And maybe not even bottom of poor. Well, maybe low poor. Okay, moving on from Jovian to Valentinian I. Magnus the Great. I mean, they're giving out great to anybody these days. Okay, so we finally have someone a little more substantial. I mean, started his own dynasty. Not that dynasties these days, and by these days I mean the sort of late 300s are that successful, but more substantial than a lot of the other guys we've been talking about. So, a Western emperor, co-emperor with his brother Valens. One of the things, he and Jovian both sort of restored the Christian element that Julian had gotten rid of, defeated the invading Alemanni, constructed new defenses along the Rhine. His general, Theodosius, keep that in mind, by the way, defeated the Great Conspiracy in Britain. Also sent Theodosius to defeat a revolt in Africa. Theodosius and his son, Theodosius. The Theodosius you should be keeping your eye on is the son, by the way. Theodosian walls when? We've got a bit to go before the Theodosian walls, my friend. We've got a bit to go. Hey, Otis is here. Welcome to the stream, my friend. I joked that they're giving out the title Great to anyone these days, but Valentinian, quite successful. Though I will say, like I said, I have some notes for each of these guys. Something that I think I noticed when we get later with these emperors, especially from this point onwards, is that, and especially in the West, and we're going to start seeing this change occur as we talk about these Western emperors, what you're going to start seeing is his general did this, his general did that. These Western emperors increasingly become sort of less powerful as compared to the generals under them. For some emperors, their generals were actually controlling the whole business. I think Valentinian was fortunate to have Theodosius under him. And I mean Theodosius the Elder, the father. He was a successful and talented general. And like I said, his son is popping up. Yeah, that's true, Dennis. Heraclius and Heraclius. And sometimes you don't even distinguish them, which is why you gotta say, well, Heraclius, the elder or whatever, the father, and the younger. But I think Valentinian deserves to be ranked quite highly. I'm gonna be honest. I mean, pretty successful. Definitely, I think either good or great. Soldier emperors started to become more rare until Maurice in the East centuries later. Yeah, it's interesting. There are still some soldier emperors, but what we have is a lot of powerful generals. So I think Valentinian might be high good. He might be high good. Maybe, well, Antoninus Pius was pretty damn good. So, because I'm trying to rank them within the tiers as well. But high good, I think. And Roydeen says you don't need to be a soldier emperor when you have good generals. This is true, but the issue comes in when your generals start controlling you. And this becomes a big problem down the line. Not ahead of Septimius Severus, though. I think that's fair. I think ahead of Vespasian, though? I think ahead of Vespasian, maybe. I think Valentinian did a lot to sort of secure the empire a little bit and fend off barbarian invasions. Alright, I think we've done Valentinian. And now we have his brother, Valens, emperor in the east. Though, we have a lot of co-emperor situations. Valens was under Valentinian in many ways. Not in title, but in reality, Valentinian was the one who was actually in charge. He it seems like maybe sort of mediocre. Defeated the Goths in 369. Had some troubles with the Sassanids. Had the Second Gothic War. Goths and Huns crossing the Danube, which he doesn't seem to have handled very well. Died fighting the Goths. Valens seems, this is the impression I got, sort of a good administrator, but maybe not always a great general. At times, he had military success. At times, he struggled. Yeah, Otis. It's a very vast tier list. I mean, it goes all the way to the end, to the fall of Constantinople, but we're not going that far. We're just going to the fall of the West. The only real military stain is the poor campaign against the Goths in the Balkans. This is true, but, I mean, that's, think about the future. This is becoming a big problem at the time. I think Valens, he's either mediocre or decent. Oh yeah, Otis. I mean, it's taken us, I'm gonna plop him into mediocre for now because I don't want to hold him here. But leave your opinions. We might put him into to decent. Yeah, Otis. It's taken us 4 hours to get. The last stream was 4 hours to get halfway through these emperors before the fall of the West. It's probably going to take us another couple of hours to get to the fall of the West. So yeah, to get through all of them, we would need, probably 2 more streams. Decent administrator, mediocre general, indecisive leadership. Yeah, he was frugal, good tax collection. Like I said, good administration. I think Valens had good administration, but he's a very balanced character. He really is. He's someone who's not in the middle because he was necessarily average on everything. He's in the middle because he had some ups and downs. Another channel that does similar tier rankings. One of their episodes went over 10 hours. My goodness. Well, yeah, we'll see how long... we'll see how long this takes in the end. I think Valens is going to go high mediocre just because of some of his struggles with the Goths, which wasn't entirely his fault. And, of course, Mainz couldn't see the future, but this is going to start being a problem in the long term. So I think high mediocre is fair. Then we move on to Gratian, son of Valentinian. emperor in the West. 367 to 383, that's quite a while. Fairly young emperor. And then after the death of Valens, Gratian appointed Theodosius I as the Eastern Emperor. Moved the capital to Mediolanum. He outlawed... so this isn't that great. Gratian, with the Edict of Thessalonica, or Thessaloniki, or whatever you want to call it, outlawed all non-Christian religion, persecuted pagans and Roman traditions along with them. And then he was killed by a usurper. Gratian had a lot of potential, but his biggest issue was in building social relations with his advisors and generals. And then Shad says, I think in reference to Valens, if only he had an Agrippa. Well, yeah, good administrator, good general, perfect combo. But Gratian, what do we think about Gratian? I'm sure some of you know more about Gratian than I do. To me, seems not great, to be honest. I mean, I understand that more Christianization was the way of things, but I am definitely partial to emperors who preferred toleration. Not to mention that we have the collapse of the Danube frontier. Not that was necessarily Gratian's fault, and this is why he moved the capital to Mediolanum. Led a successful campaign across the Rhine. Okay, that's good, that's good. I don't know, Gratian's sounding pretty mediocre to me as well. Probably not as good as Valens, honestly, but if we have some more good that he did, then maybe he can be moved up. At the time, East was mainly Christian, and in the West, paganism was barely holding. Yeah, I don't know necessarily the religious breakdown at this point, but it does seem that there was still a notable pagan presence at places throughout the empire. Yeah, and Shad points out, he removed the altar of victory from the Roman Senate house. Gratian was not into those old Roman traditions, which is kind of an L. Having one main religion was very necessary. It didn't help the West in the long run. I think that, for such a big empire, you need some sort of unifying factor. And Gratian's honestly a good example of the shift, and that unifying factor being sort of Roman culture, Roman traditions, towards Christian culture and Christian traditions. So, I agree, for such a big empire, you need a very diverse empire, you do need some sort of unification, something to unify the people. Language, culture, religion. Didn't have to be Christianity, but of course at this point it was becoming Christianity. Alright, I'm gonna put Gratian in mediocre. And, we lead into the next one. Maximus, who was the usurper that defeated Gratian. But then himself was defeated by Valentinian II and Theodosius. Yeah, Gratian, high mediocre. Anyway, Maximus. Low mediocre or bad. I honestly don't know too much about Maximus. I don't know much about his reign itself. He's one of those emperors who it's like usurper, took over, and then lost the throne. His death marks the end of direct imperial presence in northern Gaul and Britain. Tried to march on Italy and died. That's kind of an L. Yeah, I think Christianity. I just don't. I mean, it might have provided some stability. It's kind of hard to tell because the empire was such a mess at the time, right? And Rome had stability previously. Big L. Yeah, big L for Magnus Maximus. What do we have here? Trier. Stern persecutor of heretics. Kind of an L. Oh, it says right there. Upholder of orthodoxy. He censured Christians in Rome for burning down a Jewish synagogue and was condemned by Bishop Ambrose, who said people exclaimed, "The emperor has become a Jew." Jesus. I don't know. Seems like another low mediocre, maybe poor. I would say either low, mediocre, or poor. Probably poor, actually. I'm not sure he's done enough good to put him into mediocre. I think high poor. No, I mean, that's fair enough, Roy Dean. I mean, a lot of people know a lot more, including myself, about the late Republican period and the early Empire than the late Empire. Though I'd say the late Western Empire is a period I'm becoming increasingly interested in, sort of around the collapse of the West, and then, switch over to Eastern Rome. It's an interesting time. And then, of course, we're basically reaching into the Middle Ages, something I don't know very much about at all, but I'm finding it interesting to see sort of the transition from Imperial Rome to, I guess, sort of feudal medieval Europe, then with Eastern Rome still surviving. Something I don't know much about, but I do find fascinating. I really do. Okay, then. So, we move on to Valentinian II, Emperor in the West. Served under Gratian and tried to restrain despoiling of pagan temples, teamed up with Theodosius. He was found mysteriously dead and was overshadowed by the general Arbogast, who was, Theodosius's man. Have we arrived to the Hun invasions? I think we're getting to that. We've seen a mention of the Huns a bit earlier. I think we are sort of getting soon to the Hunnic invasions. I don't know, Valentinian II, he ruled for quite a while. I mean, not a super long time, but longer than a lot. He's another one who seems pretty mediocre to me. Tried to restrain the despoiling of pagan temples in Rome. That's pretty good. But he refused to restore the altar of victory, which Gratian had removed. Yeah, I think Zod's saying he was basically just a figurehead, overshadowed by Arbogast, mysteriously died, and Arbogast was sort of Theodosius' man, who we're going to get to, and Theodosius had a lot more power. I feel like Valentinian maybe didn't have too much authority on his own. when Maximus arrived, he fled to Thessalonica, which I've also heard called Thessaloniki or Salonika later. And then Theodosius was basically like, all right, I'll help you out. I'll help you out. I don't know. Seems like a mediocre one. Seems very mediocre, actually. It's probably sort of low mediocre. Sad. Yeah. It's sad how, I mean, I'm not a religious man, but I always think it's sad to see historical sites destroyed. Temples, churches, whatever we're talking about. I think it can be a sad thing to see when they're destroyed or despoiled or whatever. I wish we could just maintain them. But yeah, a lot of these trends are going to get worse later in the empire, despoiling of pagan temples, and emperors just being figureheads to generals, whether we want to talk about Arbogast, or I see some mentions of Ricimer in chat. All right. Eugenius, a usurper in the east, who was defeated by Theodosius. Okay, everyone's getting excited about Majorian, but, we're not there yet. So everyone, save your Majorian excitement for a bit later. We have, honestly, not a bit later, we've got quite a while to go before we get to Majorian. Where's Octavian? Right at the top. There he is, Augustus. Right at the top. Right at the top, Harry. Yeah, keep your pants up, lads. We haven't got to Majorian yet. I don't know. Eugenius seems like an unrankable to me. Maybe some of you have strong opinions on Eugenius. No problem, Harry. No problem. Eugenius sort of seems just like a usurper who quickly was defeated. Nah. If no one has any strong Eugenius opinions, which I certainly don't, then I'm fine to move on to Theodosius. Who was, another substantial character. It's always nice when you go through these periods of, this guy was only here for a couple of years, didn't do much, etc., etc. Then we get to someone a little more substantial, like Theodosius. So, sole ruler of the empire. He held a lot of power. And I think, probably... Do we have other sole rulers of the empire afterwards? Question. Eugenius was a successful commander and campaigned well on the Rhine frontier. Okay. While he was emperor? Proclaimed emperor by Arbogast. I don't know. We'll just leave Eugenius in unrankable. Also, we have so many emperors to rank here. Justinian after retaking Rome. Well, I guess if you wanna put it like that. Though Justinian, that's kind of different. Of course. Come to the UK, best country ever. I've been to the UK. Many times. I lived in the UK. So I'm very familiar. Anyway, Theodosius. Now, we've already talked about him. We talked about his father, Theodosius, who's also just called Theodosius. Theodosius the Elder, perhaps. And he served under Valentinian. And actually, when you look at a lot of Valentinian's successes, you can point towards Theodosius the Elder. And so this is the son of that fella, Theodosius Magnus the Great. Another great. Brought many non-Roman auxiliaries into the army, made peace with the Goths. So here we have some interesting stuff. Made peace with the Goths and allowed them to settle some Roman territory. So this is a situation where it's like short term, maybe a good idea. I mean, you don't want to be constantly fighting against the Goths, so give them a place within the empire. But long term, this is going to be a massive problem. And one of the issues is that, now look, Rome brought a lot of different people under the umbrella of its empire. One of the issues with these peoples, like the Franks and the Goths and the Vandals, is that Roman authority is crumbling so much, and these peoples have so much power that when they arrive, they don't really get brought into the empire. They don't really get integrated. They just remain as this sort of powerful third. Okay, I get it, Harry. Stop spamming, though, please. Stop. Please, no spamming, everybody. I appreciate that we all want to share our opinions. But, you know, no spamming, alright? Anyway. So, right, that's the issue with allowing people like the Goths to settle. But Theodosius the Beast, though his sons ruined all his handiwork. Yes. He was a bit of a beast. But, I mean, if we're talking about bad succession, you know, Honorius, that's one of the worst examples of all time. Draw a parallel between those tribes and the downfall of the Austrian Empire. Yeah, I mean, obviously a very different situation, but there is sort of something to be said. Progenitor of the idea of the church having a lot of leverage over the ruler of the state. Okay, so what do we think about Theodosius then? I feel like I'm getting a sort of like short-term successful, long-term big problems. Big problems. You know, short-term a successful emperor, but long-term we're talking about the church having power over the state, you know, allowing these tribes like the Goths to settle, but then not integrating them because the state didn't have the power. Destroying old Roman traditions, Shad says. Yeah, Roy Dean. Unfortunately, those aren't his walls. The Theodosian walls came later. I believe. I believe the Theodosian walls were under Theodosius II, so they're not even his walls. Economical reforms made taxation worse for the average Roman, my goodness. You're getting a lot of L's here. So, yeah. It's complicated. Succeeded in a crucial war against the Goths, but then they still settled in Roman territory with his blessing. The Nicene Creed, the Orthodox doctrine of Christianity. I don't know. Well, certainly he had some sort of walls, but what he didn't have was the Theodosian walls. He had some terrible heirs. Absolutely terrible heirs. And, you know, like I said, I mean, we have to consider succession, but, you know, we have to remember that it's not... We consider succession a bit, you know? But keep in mind that a lot of emperors had bad succession. But this is one of the worst examples, to be honest. This is really one of the worst examples of succession. So maybe... Okay, yeah, and I'm thinking good. And look, Zod's is making the point, and I agree with his point. He says, it was better to let them settle in the empire than try and fight them off. So, I think this is true. When you have, and this is what I was describing earlier, let's use the Goths, for example, but we could use some of these other tribes as an example as well. The issue was that, you know, you couldn't keep fighting them. At times, it was better to make peace and allow them to settle. Short-term success. The issue is that long-term, this causes a lot of issues. And now look, I mean, Theodosius couldn't see the future, so we can't entirely blame him for that. Also, a lot of other people contributed to that change, but you also have to consider the long-term implications of their actions. I think this is a situation where it might have been a good idea at the time, and it probably was, actually. He was successful against the Goths. Long-term, though, not great. Not great. And yeah, he brought a lot of non-Romans into the army. That's okay, Harry. Just don't send the same message like a bunch of times in a row. I see most messages sent. But I'm okay with putting... I think Theodosius belongs in good. I think he's a complicated character, you know. There's some complicated stuff about his reign. I think good, though. Theodosius paid Attila not to fight him and almost gave him his daughter. Yeah, well, we're getting around the time of Attila now. Real curious character. Anyway, okay. I think Theodosius can go into good. I'm looking at the argument between, I guess, Christianity and the Roman pagan ways in chat. Okay. So, Theodosius. Complicated character, but I think still good. Now we move on to his sons, and we're starting with Arcadius. We'll get to Honorius. Oh, okay, Zods. Yeah, I knew Attila was gonna play a role later, but I'm thinking like, that's interesting. Oh, he's thinking about Theodosius II. Probably. Maybe. Yeah. Attila comes into the story a bit later. Valentinian III, Theodosius II. They're more dealing with Attila. Okay, anyway. Let's do Arcadius first. We're doing Arcadius before we get to Honorius. So Arcadius was in the east. Honorius was in the west. Two sons of Theodosius. Let's see. And this is when we start getting to emperors who were really dominated by their advisors and generals. So Arcadius was dominated by his ministers. 395 rebellion of the Visigoths under Alaric I. We start getting some notable names as kings of the Vandals, the Goths, etc. Arcadius failed to respond. He made Alaric Magister, Militum, in order to counter the influence of Stilicho. Now that's an L. I mean, you don't want to work with Stilicho? Come on now. Pushed around by the Goths, pushed around by his advisors, pushed around by his wife. And this is when you had that whole, I remember this, that whole beef between Eudocia, his wife, and John Chrysostom, the prominent, bishop? Pope? And John was very popular. Young. But Arcadius, emperor only in name. 17. We got a lot of emperors only in name at this point, and Arcadius is one of those. But that's not good. He survived. That is good, but unfortunately, I can't give you too many points for surviving. So Arcadius, I mean, probably bad. There's not a whole lot of positives, you know what I mean? But, I mean, he's a lot better than his brother. I'll put it that way. Arcadius looks great in comparison to his brother. Complete opposite to Theodoric, who was emperor in all but name. Yeah. Well, I have a lot to say about some of these barbarians down the line. But it is interesting. We have emperors in all but name, like Theodoric, and then we have emperors who had no power. Emperors in only name. Yeah, Arcadius is going to go into bad. Going into bad. He's probably better than, like, Nero and Elagabalus. And now we get to Honorius. I mean, easy S tier. Clearly one of the greatest of all time. I mean, you know what I mean? We're talking about, you know, Roman emperors. You have Augustus, and he was good. Augustus was good. But he was no Honorius, I'll tell you that much. I mean, truly one of the greatest. No, I'm kidding. Honorius is getting dropped down to bottom tier. So, we have Arcadius in the east, and we have Honorius in the west. Yeah, and I've heard of Honorius' chicken story. We'll get to that. So, the one good thing about Honorius' reign was Stilicho. the barbarian general Stilicho. Stilicho's a real interesting character. I know History Dose has a video on Stilicho, and I'd very much like to react to that at some point. Because I think, you know, we get some real interesting, like, barbarian characters late in Roman history. Some good and some bad. You get guys like Stilicho, Ricimer, you know. But, so, he's the one that moved the capital to Ravenna, where it would stay, I think, until the collapse of the West. You know, continuous barbarian invasions and usurpers. Visigoths under Alaric invaded Italy. Now, Stilicho defeated Alaric. Invasions of Gaul, revolts in Britain. Honorius completely lost control of Britain. He said, deal with your own stuff. I can't help you. Can't help you. And then, Honorius was young, but unfortunately, when you're this bad, are we gonna, we're probably only gonna rank these emperors today. I mean, I guess we'll see how long it takes us, Shad. But after this, we'll return to the live reactions, you know. We've done our tier list streams. After this, the next live stream will be some sort of live reaction. Though we'll probably do more tier lists in the future. But maybe not today. I'm not quite sure. And then Honorius executes Stilicho, who was probably the best thing about his reign. So Stilicho's men defect to Alaric. Of course, you know, Stilicho is this barbarian general who is loyal to Honorius, loyal to the empire, and he's doing his best. And then Honorius, because he's threatened by Stilicho, executes him. And so what do Stilicho's men do? They go to Alaric. Wow, who could have thought? And the Visigoths. Britain was lost. Gaul was lost to the Goths and the Franks. By Honorius' death, a lot of Spain was lost as well. I mean, this is truly... He's probably the worst of all time. Is he the worst of all time? Yeah, he was a terrible emperor that ruled for a long time. He had a long reign. Now, to be fair, like, to stop all of this territory being lost, you would have had to be one of the best of all time, really. But, you know, Honorius, just a massive L. Okay, and some of you are saying that you think Valentinian III was worse. Okay, well we'll get to him later. So we can discuss whether Honorius or Valentinian III were worst. But Honorius is definitely the worst so far. Just easily. Easily. And also, I think Commodus is worse than Didius Julianus. Okay, so that's Honorius. We've had our, our rage. And, so the Romans permanently lost Britain under Honorius. Now, the other territory, Hispania, Gaul, would go back and forth, but it is still true that these territories were absolutely slipping away under Honorius. Zod says that Commodus is worse. I think Honorius is still worse, but maybe so. Right, in the chicken story. So, here, I'll read it out. I want to make sure I get it right. Here, Control F, chicken. There we go. Likely apocryphal story, so probably not true, but it gives you the idea. On hearing the news that Rome had perished, Honorius was initially shocked, thinking the news was in reference to a favorite chicken he had named Roma. So there you go. Light was watching some hockey. Very nice, very nice. Scandinavia and Canada united in their love for the sport. But welcome back, Light. You've come back at a good time. We were just doing Honorius, who we've ranked as the worst so far, bottom of Tiber fish bait. Honorius the Great. Yeah, unfortunately, you missed the fake out where we put Honorius in S tier, then brought him back down. Yes, Light, you're making the same jokes that we did at the time. Honorius the Terrible. Except, Ivan the Terrible. The Terrible was more meant like, not necessarily like bad, but like, oh, terrible, awesome, immense, that sort of thing. Honorius the Goat. Honorius the Incompetent. You can say a lot of things about Honorius. I mean, Honorius was sort of one of these puppet emperors, but also just everything he did was terrible. Honorius the Cow, yeah, about basically everything. Okay, so, Honorius. Now we have a lot of Constantine-related names. Constantine III, Constans II, Constantius III. I have a hard time not getting these guys mixed up at times. But we start with Constantine III. And I think some of these guys are going to be unrankable, because he was a usurper in the West, who was then defeated by Constantius. All of this is during the reign of Honorius. Yeah. Yeah. So Honorius is 393 to 423, and then Constantine III is 407 to 411, so in the middle of Honorius' reign. And then Constans II is around a similar time, in the middle of Honorius' reign. And then Constantius III is 421, so still not at the end. So all of these guys are during the reign of Honorius. Yeah, Rome, well, yeah. If you wanted to turn things around after Honorius, you needed a truly great emperor. Which is what you didn't get in the West. So Constantine III, yeah, he fought barbarians a lot. He had some. This is sort of a similar story. Who we have, a usurper emperor who was fighting his whole reign. Had some successful campaigning along the Rhine, but basically spent his reign trying to hold on to his authority, fighting against, as Light puts it, political intrigue and instability. So, I don't know. I think Constantine... I mean, there's the question of, can Constantine III even be ranked? I mean, he was around for a couple of years, but, you know, he was not... I mean, he was a total usurper, you know what I mean? Yeah, everyone's getting angry about Ricimer. Wait a second, guys. And, you know, talking about Majorian. We got a bit to go. Constantine III settled the Visigoths and Roman territories, some early federati there. I think Constantine III is probably poor. I mean, this is another guy who wasn't good, but he wasn't influential enough to do that much damage to the empire, you know what I mean? I mean, this was during the reign of Honorius. This was a terrible time already. It's not like he could do much worse. And then we go to Constans II. He was defeated by Gerontius. I mean, I think this is another... Unless anyone has any particular opinions on Constans II, maybe an unrankable, or maybe like a poor again. Where do we have... Where is he? Can't even find this man. You know it's bad when you're not even on the Wikipedia page. Come on now. He's not even here. Oh, no. Oh, Constans. Whoops. I don't know, I might just... He's like... Constans, it's like Constantine III, but just less. And that's it, basically. Yeah, and Nico points out, Constantine III was recognized by Honorius for a while, which I guess in some ways makes him legitimate. Alright, sorry Constans, you've been relegated to unrankable. And now, we'll take a break from all the Constantine names. You know, before we get to Constantius III, we'll get to a very long-ranking emperor. Though I believe he took office when he was very young. Theodosius II. And Roydeen was talking about the Theodosian walls earlier. The Theodosian walls were built under Theodosius II, not Theodosius I. So, there you go. So he was emperor in the east, and we're talking 402 to 450. So basically during the first half of his reign, Honorius was in the west, and then we have a selection of other emperors throughout the rest of Theodosius II's reign. See, you know, another emperor who had very influential officials. He founded the University of Constantinople, collected laws and recorded them in the Codex Theodosianus, which was the basis for Justinian's law code. War against the Sassanids, a bit of a stalemate. Faced raids from the Huns. A failed expedition to stop the fall of Roman Africa. Losses to the Huns, paid tribute to them. Tried to moderate between Cyril and Nestorius. We get some Christian drama here. He became an emperor at 9 months old. What a Chad. Yeah, well, he reigned for about 48 years. Pushed around by his sister, wife, and eunuchs. You see, Theodosius seems like a good emperor. The one that was complex. There was good and bad. And he was an emperor who had influential advisors and struggled with that. But yeah, patron of the arts and sciences, established University of Constantinople, like I mentioned, Theodosian walls were built by Anthemius. There's a familiar name. Yeah, he was a very influential Praetorian prefect. His administration carried him. He's the definition of "this is not my problem." Yeah, he's got to be. I mean, he sounds like pretty good. I mean, it sounds like pretty good. Sounds like a high good, to be honest with you. Or maybe a mid good. I mean, like I said, there are some L's, like the failed expedition to Roman Africa. He tried and failed to stop the fall of Roman Africa. Stalemate against the Sassanids. Losses and paying tribute to the Huns. I mean, these are bad. But it does seem like his administration was pretty successful. Alright, see you later, Dennis. Thank you for stopping in. Yeah. And this was the guy who dealt with the Huns, not Theodosius the First. Yep, University of Constantinople, like I said. Yeah, and this is true, Roy Dean. It is better to be the Emperor of the East than the Emperor of the West. I mean, the West is an absolute dumpster fire that has been crumbling for decades and will continue to crumble. Whereas the East, though it has a lot of issues, its territory is being eaten into, it is on the decline as well at this point. The East is more stable, at the very least. So yeah, the East is a better position than the West. Alright, I think good. Maybe in the middle of good. I think better than Domitian. I'm not sure if he's better than Vespasian, though. Plus, like we said, became emperor very young and was sort of dominated by his wife and advisors. So it is kind of difficult to work out what he was personally responsible for. But, you know, we're looking at their reigns. And yes, Roy Dean, yes. I believe the Vandals are taking over Roman Africa, aka North Africa at this point. Alright, so back to another, Constantius. Constantius III, only emperor for a very short time. He was a general under Honorius, who was made co-emperor with Honorius, but then died months later. Constantius III seems like an unrankable to me. Some of you said he was a good general, but while he was emperor, I'm not sure if he achieved enough to be ranked. Magister Militum, commander. Right, so he was one of these generals who had a lot of influence. Comparable to Stilicho, Chad. And then he was made co-emperor, but he very quickly died afterwards. So I think Constantius III is got to go into unrankable. I mean, like I said, if we were ranking them as generals or as people, then we'd have a lot more to go on. He was a pretty prominent general. But Constantius III was emperor for only a very short time. So I don't think there's enough in his reign to rank. Yeah, totally unrankable. Totally unrankable. But an interesting character. And at this point, like I said, this is an era of powerful generals and advisors. So we have a lot of generals and advisors who are very influential, sometimes more influential than the emperors they serve under, and some of those generals, like Constantius III, will end up becoming emperors. But, we're only ranking them on their reign as emperor. So if they didn't do much as emperor, or if they died quickly, we gotta leave it there. So unrankable for good old Constantius III. And on to Johannes, emperor in the West after Honorius. So we've finally gotten to after Honorius. Everyone can rejoice. Honorius is gone. On to Johannes. Unrecognized by Theodosius, though. Tolerated pagans. What I've written here is little information on him, and he was defeated by Theodosius. Yeah, it's really remarkable that Honorius lasted so long, but I really think it's because Honorius was so weak that he was the perfect puppet if you were a powerful general like a Constantius III or a Stilicho. I also think Honorius got oddly lucky with, or maybe it's not even luck, but with all the usurpers, it was just usurpers fighting other usurpers, dying in battles. Like, it was an absolute mess. That's probably how Honorius lasted for that long. Let's see Johannes here, because I don't have much on him. He may be an unrankable. I mean, he wasn't emperor for long. Okay, so Johannes was elevated when Theodosius II hesitated. Shadowy, obscure. Seems like an unrankable to me. We just don't... He didn't rule for very long. Less than 2 years, a year and a half. And we don't have many sources on him. So I don't think we can put him anywhere but unrankable. Really. Alright. Alright, on to Valentinian III. We had some chatter about Valentinian III earlier. Now you get a chance to talk about him. So, we have another... So, basically, we have Honorius. He dies. Then we have Johannes for a year and a half, very short. Then we have Valentinian, who rules for quite a while. About 30 years. He's the emperor in the West. Made emperor by Theodosius, dominated by his generals and his advisors. Now, there are some very early victories against the Goths, but the Visigoths are in Gaul, Vandals are in Hispania, because they're in Africa and Hispania. The Western Empire declines, fighting amongst generals. Valentinian basically says to the Vandals, yeah, well, I guess... And we talked about this with Theodosius, they can't manage to get back Africa, and so they're like, well, guess the Vandals can have it. Vandals take Carthage, raid Sicily. He basically loses control of Hispania. The Romans still hold some territory, but they have almost no control there. That leads to serious financial problems, because Hispania produces a lot of cash money. Gave Attila the Hun the title of Magister Militum. And then Attila invades Italy, approaches Rome, but a combination of probably bribes and his own situation, he leaves. So yeah, I think Valentinian's going right into bottom tier. Though I honestly think Honorius... Well, I don't know. What do we think about Valentinian III, everybody? Everybody seems to have some pretty negative takes. Who was the powerful Aetius? Is that how you pronounce that? That was the powerful general under Valentinian III? Another one of these emperors who were dominated by their powerful general, Aetius. Mostly subordinate to his general. Yep, and like I said, we've seen a bunch of these. Stilicho, Constantius III, Aetius. Defeated Attila the Hun in Gaul. That's a W. But then, of course, throughout Valentinian's reign, eventually Attila makes it back down to Italy. Probably because Valentinian kills Aetius. See, this is the thing. I mean, sure, it's not great to be a puppet emperor dominated by your generals, but if you have a good general and then you execute him, that might lead to some issues down the road. Probably not the wisest move. Hmm. Wow. Oh, interesting. Valentinian killed Aetius, and in response, his bodyguards assassinated Valentinian. Hmm. Yeah, I think Valentinian has to go into Tiber fishbait because everything totally crumbled under him, but there probably isn't much he could have done anyway. Not in his position. Well, as Roy Dean points out, at this point, we have a lot of generals and advisors who are more powerful than the emperors. And so you kind of want to, you're like, Aetius probably deserves to be on the tier list instead of Valentinian, but he wasn't an emperor, so he can't be. Huh. Yeah. Well, what we have is Marcian. Marcian next, who, and this is what happens when we have the Eastern and Western emperors. We got to jump back and forth. So you're thinking of the West with Valentinian, jump back to the East for Marcian. Marcian comes after Theodosius II. He cancels the tribute to the Huns, which could have been a big problem, but then Attila dies. So I think it gets real. Did he defeat Attila? Okay, I didn't know that. I thought that Attila died, and then the Hunnic Confederation basically fell apart. I didn't know that Marcian held a W against Attila himself. Okay. Interesting. Huh. Okay. Accepted Ostrogoths as Federati. Once again, we've talked about, it's a complicated move. There's pros and cons. Council of Chalcedon. Ooh, that's important. That's important. Anti-Miaphysite. Alienated Syria and Egypt. Interesting. Cut expenses. Reduced corruption. Left empire with a surplus. My goodness. Yeah. Seems good. Marcian was kind of nuts. Really, why so? Marcian seems interesting. We're getting some good administration. Reduce corruption, left the empire with a surplus. Seems like militarily pretty successful, though I think he's lucky that Attila died. And then the Hunnic Confederation broke down, even though he had some success against the Huns. But Marcian is also a good... You can look at him as a changing of the times. You have the Council of Chalcedon, which really establishes the religious importance of Constantinople. It's anti-Miaphysite, which alienates a lot of people. And Marcian was elected without the consultation of the Western Emperor, so we basically see this further split between West and East, and this further development of Christian orthodoxy. Marcian seems to be a good example of the changing of the times. So a really interesting emperor, but a good one for sure. I feel like I have to put him a little lower than Theodosius II, because he just ruled for such a shorter amount of time. Maintained stability and territorial integrity of the Eastern Roman Empire. Yeah. Economic reforms, good administration. Yeah, seems good. Maybe if he had longer, he might have done even more good. But he had 7 years. Yeah, Marcion's surprisingly good emperor, I would say. Fair, very fair. All right, that's Marcion. On to Petronius Maximus. Back to the West, Emperor of the West. Reigned for 2.5 months. Killed Valentinian, took his place. Not recognized by Marcion. The Vandals invaded Italy. Maximus tried to flee Rome and was stoned by an angry mob. And then the Vandals sacked Rome. Oh, no. Oh, no. Yeah. Well, he's seeming like a Tiber fish bait. I mean, the sack of Rome, that's a big L. That's a big L. Seems like a bit of a schemer. A schemer who supported the killing of Aetius, as Nico's laying out, then plotted to kill Valentinian, then got the job of emperor, and then was terrible. Nothing he could do to stop the Vandals. It was every man for himself. And the Romans took that to heart, and then a mob killed him. Well, I mean, that's kind of what you get. He could have been a good emperor. He's one of Aetius' most competent men. Maybe he could have been. I don't know much about him, but he wasn't. History March has a 2-part video on Aetius. Do they? I honestly don't think I've seen that. Actually, you know what, Roy Dean? Put that in the Discord and tag me on it, or at me, so I'll remember to look at that later. Right, and now we're on to Avitus. He was defeated. Avitus was defeated by the Roman Senate and Ricimer. Oh my, we're finally getting to Ricimer. When am I going to do the Alexander reactions? Well, let me tell you. Let me look at my schedule here. Should be starting like end of April. Roughly. Avitus was little more than a Visigothic puppet emperor. Avitus survived being deposed by Ricimer. That is impressive. Okay, so is Avitus into fish bait? Is that what we're saying? Seems like we got another fish bait on our hands. Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of reactions lined up. So it takes us a while to get to anything, really. Like, we got to finish Sengoku Jidai. We've got, ideally, more Rome reactions coming up, even though the copyright is an absolute menace. Interesting. Majorian. Alright, so I'm going to take a little break right now. I need to go use the bathroom. I need to refill my water, because it is empty. You know, gotta stay hydrated during these streams. So I'm gonna leave you waiting with bated breath for Majorian. So we're taking a bit of a break. Y'all can all start chatting about Majorian, and I'll be back in a couple minutes. All right, Majorian. Okay. I can see y'all have been talking about Majorian. So, obviously one of the more famous emperors on this list, and going to be near the top, Western emperor who tried his absolute hardest to reconquer Roman territory. And did a pretty good job. Unfortunately, Ricimer, as everybody's pointing out. And we have a lot of these powerful generals and advisors, but some of them are very naughty, like Ricimer. Defended Italy, brought Gaul, Hispania, etc., etc. A lot of good stuff. Good administration as well. I think that's worth noting. I mean, this incredible reconqueror, but also good administration. And in my opinion, he is great. Top of great. We have Shad's two favorites, Majorian and Gallienus, up here. I think Majorian's top of great. He really re-expanded the territory controlled. As Nico points out, when Majorian became emperor, the empire only directly controlled mainland Italy. In effect, they had lost their authority in most of their other western territory, and he reclaims a lot of that. He banned people using materials from ancient monuments and buildings. Yeah. He had some good policy, I think. Some good administration, like I said. Now, I think, of course, the downside with Majorian is that he only ruled for a couple of years. He was killed by Ricimer, and then, if Majorian had been able to rule for longer, or if he had a great emperor immediately after him, maybe some of his conquests would have been better maintained, but unfortunately they weren't. Roy Dean says top of good. Interesting. I think top of good is a little too harsh, in my opinion. I think Majorian's conquests are truly, truly impressive, I think highest great. I know in the end, Majorian did not reverse the fall of the West. It continued to happen. But if you look at the short amount of time he had and what he managed to do in that amount of time, for me, it's hard not to put him in great, really. I mean, he's truly exceptional. You can't put him into Optimus Princeps, in my opinion, because long term it didn't work out. And that's not entirely his fault, of course. But I think great. In my opinion, is where he belongs. Yeah, I really think, and Light puts it perfectly, I think the most impressive thing with Majorian, even compared to some of these other impressive emperors, is that Majorian had nothing to work with. Nothing. And he still managed to accomplish great things. Benny says maximum decent. Yeah, and I agree with Roy Dean. I don't think Majorian can go in Optimus Princeps. But I think great is where he belongs. And I think, Majorian Magnus would be a fair name to give him. Okay, so after Majorian, we get Libius Severus the Third, apparently. Just a puppet of Ricimer. We have the influence of Ricimer, unfortunately. A puppet of Ricimer, unrecognized by the Eastern Emperor. And we're going to get to him in a while. But Leo, he's a more substantial emperor as well. But Libius Severus, puppet of Ricimer, Vandals continue to raid Italian coast. The further erosion of Roman power. So I think the question is, how low do you put someone like Libius Severus? You have the amazing reign of Majorian, and then we get back to Libius Severus, and unfortunately it's sort of a return to the norm, which means everything starts crumbling again. Though he was just a puppet of Ricimer. I mean, certainly low, but is it Tiber Fishbait low? Or is it terrible? Or puppet shouldn't count, as it isn't them making the decisions. I mean, I get the point. What we're doing here is ranking emperors, but as Zods points out, Ricimer was emperor in all but name during his reign, But we're still ranking these puppets, but that gives them negative points. And Roy Dean makes the argument that Majorian should have predicted a betrayal. So in part, his death was of his own fault. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard. Honestly, at the current rate, I feel like we'd have to put Libius Severus into Tiber Fishbait, because I know emperors being this terrible is getting normalized, but if you remember who else we have in terrible, these, terrible emperors in the 400s are so much worse than terrible emperors of centuries past. So I think we have to slap him into Tiber Fishbait, honestly. I really do. And then, are we going to go beyond Romulus? A little bit. We're going to go to Justinian. That's where we're ending this. So, after Libius Severus, after Libius Severus, there's a 2-year emperorless gap in the West. Just no emperor. And then Leo appoints Anthemius emperor from 467 to 472. Now, he has a good relationship with the East because Leo appoints him. Failed campaign against the Vandals, lost to Visigoths in Gaul. And then Leo sent Olybrius to mediate between Ricimer and Anthemius, but Olybrius teamed up with Ricimer and then defeated Anthemius. Damn. Big L. I guess Anthemius doesn't seem as bad as Libius Severus. Yeah. And this is a big invasion of Roman Africa, or I guess at this point Vandal North Africa, which failed because of Basilicus, who we'll get to quite a bit later, actually. Yes, if Ricimer was here, he'd be Tiber Fishbait. I think Anthemius is not as bad as these guys, but that's still really bad. Like, really bad. And maybe it wasn't entirely his fault, but still bad. No, I'm not ending the live. We've still got a while to go. Well, maybe not a while, but, we've got until Justinian. And then we might have time for a reaction at the end. I don't know. A short reaction. Anyway, I'm putting Anthemius in terrible, because I don't think he's quite Tiber Fishbait tier. Yeah, and Benny makes a point that at this point, Western Rome is a dead man walking. I mean, we're not quite at Romulus Augustulus, but Western Rome is, it's kind of done. It's kind of done. You know what I mean? Olybrius, now, we don't know anything about his reign. He died very shortly into it. But honestly, teaming up with Ricimer to take out Anthemius, that's pretty bad in the first place. The question is if it's terrible bad or Tiber Fishbait bad. And yeah, Shad answered it, but Roydian asked about the Roman East. You have civilization, wealthy civilization extending further back, more urbanized, more trade, that kind of stuff. More well-established in many ways. Yeah, Rome managed to sort of shift the center of the Mediterranean world west a bit to Rome and the Italian peninsula, when beforehand it had been more eastwards oriented, And then, as the Western Empire begins to crumble, the center of power in the Mediterranean shifts back eastwards. A bit of a return to form. In a different way, of course. Then we have Glycerius. Emperor in the West, unrecognized by Leo, because Leo had nominated Julius Nepos. We'll be talking about both of them. Leo next. He's a interesting character. At this point, I mean, we have Byzantine emperors in many ways. Though Leo ruled for quite a while. And Julius Nepos is one of the two last emperors of the West. Depends on how you wanna look at it. But little is known about his reign. Repelled some barbarian invasions. Then Leo I sent Julius Nepos, and Glycerius surrendered and abdicated. He was basically a puppet of Gundobad, who was a nephew of Ricimer. Yeah, I mean, Benny says he defended Italy against the Goths, which is good, and then Nico says Glycerius was a puppet of the Burgundian king Gundobad, which is bad. So, I mean, I don't know. Bad? Seems not as bad as some of these others. Definitely not as bad. Because he did some defense, but still bad. And then, and you get to the end of the West, it gets a little bit depressing, honestly. Everything's just terrible all the time. And shifting back to the East is honestly a little bit of relief. Just because, not saying the East is doing great at this time, but it's doing better than the damn West. I mean, the Western Roman Empire is not going to exist in a little bit. Alright, see you, Harry. Gundobad is an orc name. So, Leo first, Thrax, Emperor in the East. Placed on the throne by General Aspar, but ruled in his own right. First emperor to be crowned by the Patriarch. And Theodoric, who we're going to talk about as well, was raised at Leo's court. Very interesting, very interesting. And then we talked about that failed expedition against the Vandals, and then Leo I tried to bolster the West. He didn't really succeed in the long run. So where would we put Leo I? I'm thinking sort of seems a mediocre-ish. Maybe more towards the decent side. Leo I was the first emperor in the East to conduct Senate meetings in Greek instead of Latin. Yeah, Leo I is another one of those emperors that really shows the sign of the times. Oh, and so we're on Leo I, Thrax. Leo shows more of this transition towards this Eastern way of doing things, transition towards what we will know as the Byzantine Empire, conducting these Senate meetings in Greek. First emperor crowned by the Patriarch of Constantinople. A very interesting emperor, but not a particularly good one. I think middle of mediocre. And I mean, like I said, you're sort of tempted to put him higher because you look at the West, and the West is a burning trash heap with a bunch of terrible, terrible emperors. And then you look eastwards, and you see Leo, who's not a particularly amazing ruler, but at least he rules with some stability for a couple of years, which the West wasn't doing at that point. But in the grand scheme, I think he's got to be more mediocre. Also, I mean, the West was crumbling in front of him, and he tried to bolster it, but ultimately failed. Though, of course, you can very much make the argument that, what could he have done? You know what I mean? At that point, he was focused on his sphere, the Eastern Roman Empire, and the West was kind of out of his control at this point. I mean, the West was out of anybody's singular control, really. And then we have Leo II, after Leo I. He's the grandson of Leo I, and he's the son of Zeno, who we'll get to later. He died shortly into his reign. He's got to be unrankable. Leo II didn't rule for that long. Died too soon. It was too young to sign any documents. Yeah, and as Shad is saying, Zeno controlled everything under Leo, though. Because how it works, we have a while till we actually get to Zeno. But Zeno's another substantial, interesting one. But yes, unrankable. Literally 7 years old. That's fair enough to be put into unrankable if those are your qualifications. Then we get to Julius Nepos. Now, generally, Romulus Augustulus is seen as the last emperor in the West. Some argue that Julius Nepos is, because he maintained his claim to the position of Western Emperor until his death in 480, which is, of course, after Romulus Augustulus was deposed. I mean, I'm fine with keeping Romulus Augustulus as sort of the end of the Western Empire, but it's just an interesting little note. Julius Nepos was the last person to be crowned Roman Emperor in the city of Rome. The next person was Charlemagne. Over 300 years later. Oh my. Very interesting. This chat has some opinions on Charlemagne, I think. Or at least his legitimacy. Julius Nepos was recognized as legitimate. He tried and failed to establish control of Roman territories, and after a rebellion, he fled Italy in 475. I don't think... you can't really rank Julius Nepos highly, because he faced a rebellion, then fled. Only lived for a couple more years. I don't think Tiber Fishbait. Probably not terrible either. I mean, he's just a bad emperor in a bad time. You know what I mean? What are you going to do? Or maybe a mediocre emperor at a bad time. There's not much he could have done. I think he's either bad or poor. Yeah. I mean, yeah, separate Charlemagne from the question of the claim to being a Roman emperor. Just looking at Charlemagne in his own right, he was a very impressive and powerful ruler. I think Charlemagne's a fascinating guy. But yeah, not a Roman emperor, but a powerful ruler. Alright, Julius Nepos is going to go into bad. And now, guys, we finally get to it. And the tier list isn't done yet. Remember, I said we're going to Justinian. So keep that in your heads. And that'll be a little more uplifting, because now we're probably getting to the low point of this. We've gotten to Romulus Augustulus. I will say the thing is, though... Romulus Augustulus was a child who didn't really do anything on the throne. He was placed on the throne by his father, the general Orestes. I think that's how you pronounce it. In fact, his father probably should have taken the throne, but Romulus was instead placed on the throne as a child and didn't do anything. I think, I know he's super, this is the last Western emperor, but, he's probably unrankable, in my opinion. Maybe some of you have another take on this. Yeah, as Shad puts it, he had no power. No power. I think he's unrankable. I really do. And with Romulus Augustulus... Yeah. Yeah, unrankable. And with Romulus Augustulus, and we're going to take a bit of a tangent away from the tier list, we get to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But I think this is an interesting time. And like with everything Roman, it's not simple. It's always complicated. There are always shades of gray. Now, Romulus Augustulus is deposed by Odoacer, right? Now, people see this as the fall of the West. But to be honest, what actually changes with the fall of Romulus Augustulus? Like, I mean, immediately what changes? You know, Roman territory in the West is ruled by a powerful barbarian general, Odoacer. That's been happening for a while. You know, generals have had this power for a long, long time. A lot of these Western emperors have been puppets. All that happens at this point is that the puppet gets removed. And Odoacer rules in his own right. And Odoacer even has communication and a relationship with the East. I believe Zeno recognizes eventually Odoacer as basically ruling Italy as some sort of vassal of Rome. And you can maybe make the argument that, you know, Zeno becomes the sole Roman emperor, and Italy is ruled by his vassals, Odoacer, and then Theodoric. Though, of course, Theodoric, by the end of his reign, starts to have a more shaky relationship with the East. But, yeah, and this is the point I'm making. As Shad says, the fall of the West was a slow transition, not a singular event. It really was. And to be honest, you could put Odoacer and Theodoric on this tier list. You really could. And frankly, if you put Odoacer and Theodoric on this tier list, they would rank a lot higher than many of these legitimate Roman emperors. Yeah. Emperors in all but name. So I just think it's an interesting thing to point out that, yes, we technically have the recognized fall of the West, but if you actually look at the real situation on the ground, nothing really changed immediately. It was a slow process over time. And Zeno, the Eastern Roman Emperor, gave these barbarian generals the right to rule this Roman territory. And they would continue to recognize the Roman Emperor, or the Eastern Roman Emperor / Byzantine Emperor, as the legitimate Emperor of Rome for a while. You know, there's not a simple cutoff point. It's complicated. Yeah, Roydeen, and you know, Roydeen has some opinions on Rome. He says Rome either fell in 27 BC or 1203 AD. It fell in neither of those years, in my opinion. It definitely didn't fall in 27 BC. I mean, once again, the fall, like, Rome evolved over time, and it became very complicated. But if you have to draw a line, you would draw a line in 1453, the fall of Constantinople, right? And there's always arguments to be made that Roman legacy persevered and Roman influence, and, you know, the Roman Empire was basically nothing by the time of the fall of Constantinople. But this is why, you know, it's not really always accurate to draw these firm points. When did Rome fall? There's not really a singular year when it fell. But if you had to choose one, you'd probably choose 1453. Yeah, and we can get it, you know, Zods points out 1461. It's very complicated, you know. It gets real complicated when you get down to the nitty-gritty. But what is clear to me is that Rome continued through the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, for a long, long time after the supposed fall of the West. And the fall of the West was also a process that took a long, long time. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay, so we're past the fall of Rome. Everyone cheer up. It's over. Move on, move on. Now, shift back to the east. Shift to the east. Reorient yourself from the Roman Empire and the fall of the West to the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. Now we're embarking on a whole new journey. And who we're getting to next is kind of difficult because we're trying to do this in chronological order, but Zeno ruled, and then Basilicus overthrew, and then Zeno ruled again. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Basilicus, the usurper, and then get to Zeno. Then we'll talk about them in concert. And we're doing this until we get to Justinian, okay? And we're stopping at Justinian. And I think that means we will have time to do a short reaction. So everyone start thinking of any videos you'd like me to react to, but don't post them now, because I'm not going to see them. Wait until we're done with the tier list, and have your videos ready then. My goodness. Roydeen has his essay on. Oh, he's citing sources. Very interesting. Okay, Basilicus. So a usurper in the east. Zeno took the throne in 474. Basilicus overthrew him in 475, but Basilicus lost support due to high taxes and his quote-unquote heretical policy. I think he was a bit of a Miaphysite. There was a big fire, which was viewed as God's punishment for his actions. That's fine, Roydeen. It's not spam if it's, messages broken up. It's only spam if you keep sending the same thing over and over again. And it was an interesting quote as well. Yeah, and I think Nico points out something very interesting. If not for Basilicus, Zeno might have been in a position to do something when Romulus was deposed. Now, of course, in the long term, Zeno wouldn't have been able to do much to prevent his territory being ruled by a bunch of barbarian vassals, which is what happened. And we just talked about how the fall of the West wasn't really the fall of the West. But yeah, Zeno might have been able to do something. Yeah, and Roydeen points out the thing about Basilicus is that he had high taxes, but he didn't have the support of the church, and he didn't have those victories. So pretty bad. Basilicus is who I was talking about. Pretty bad. Maybe not terrible. Well, I don't know. I think Basilicus is either bad because his rule was bad, or if you make an argument that Basilicus could have done something when Romulus Augustulus was deposed, and he didn't, then he could be put into terrible. Yeah, and Shad points this out. The Eastern perspective on the fall of the West is interesting. To them, the deposition of Romulus, this was not, the fall of half of their empire. This was not the fall of Rome. This was just another invasion or usurper. And the empire would once again rule the West, which it did under Zeno. According to their perspective, Zeno ruled the entire Roman Empire. It's just that some of the Western territory was basically ruled by barbarian vassals. I think Basilicus might be, low bad. But I'd be interested to hear if any of you have an argument for terrible. If not, then we will move on to Zeno. And it was thought that Rome would once again conquer those territories. And, by the way, they did. Under Justinian, they did reconquer a lot of those territories. But obviously in the long term, everything would continue to sort of shrink. Anyway, on to Zeno. So, an emperor of the East. We've already sort of talked about his role in the fall of the West and how he was usurped and blah, blah, blah. Initially, Zeno was unpopular because he was an Isaurian, which is a region of Anatolia, which had been in the empire for a long-ass time, but I guess he was still seen as a barbarian. Usurped by Basilicus, fled, and then came back. Basilicus was so hated that he was re-recognized by the Senate. They said, Zeno, we're so sorry. Come back. Please come back. We don't like you because you're a barbarian, but Basilicus was ass. And then Zeno accepted the rule of Odoacer, you know? He defeated a couple of uprisings, diplomacy, some war with the Goths, some L's, but nothing too bad. He passed the Act of Union, Henoticon, tried to reconcile Chalcedonianism and Miaphysitism. The Pope of Rome refused. But Zeno did sort of stabilize the Eastern Empire. Zeno apparently died by being buried alive in the order of his wife. My goodness, that's quite a way to go. So I think Zeno is probably maybe like a mediocre to decent. He might be a decent, honestly. I mean, he definitely had some L's, but considering the position he was in, I feel like he did a pretty decent job. Yes, and Nico's pointing out the role that Zeno had in Western affairs. After Odoacer supported Ilus, a general who rebelled against Zeno, Zeno sent Theodoric and the Ostrogoths to Italy to replace Odoacer. So, I mean, this sort of shows you that though, of course, a lot of the Western Empire was outside of Zeno's control, Zeno was still ruling it in some ways, like the sole ruler of Rome. He still held some authority, some influence, and, he replaces Odoacer with Theodoric. And then, I think Odoacer is kind of underrated, but people especially recognize Theodoric as basically Roman emperor, Western emperor in all but name, with the authority that he held. We could rank Theodoric, but I can't add images to this. But I think Theodoric would probably be in the probably above decent good. He also was not a legitimate Roman emperor. He was basically ruling as a vassal and was recognized as such. But Theodoric would be good. Yeah, and also the thing is, if we extend it out and rank Theodoric, then there's a whole list of other people that we could add to this list. You know what I mean? Or add to this tier list. It would get pretty complicated. But yeah, Theodoric would be up there for sure. But he's not getting ranked. He's not getting ranked. Anyway, so Zeno into decent. I think that's deserved. And after Zeno, we have Anastasius first. Decorus. 491 to 518. Wow, Shad says high good or low great. Okay, well, let's read through what he did. So he was in his 60s when he ascended. Old fella. Reduced taxes, reforms, administered effectively, improved the empire's financial situation, defeated the Isaurian rebellion. Not so great against the Sassanids, but he built Dara, which is the famous fortress along the Roman-Persian border. We talk about it a lot, remember, in our series on Belisarius. Built the Anastasian Wall, or Anastasian Wall, I guess that would be, west of Constantinople, and then died in either his late 80s or at 90. Good administrator, required taxes to be paid in cash, stabilizer. This guy's actually good, what the hell? The only Roman emperor other than Domitian to successfully combat inflation. Yeah, and the actions of Anastasius, and then Justin, I suppose, left Justinian with all that cash, which he then blew through. So I think, I think Anastasius fits the bill for great, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I think the great tier has a lot of efficient administrators. Anastasius sort of stabilized the rebellion, defeated usurpers, established more security, and had a lot of successful reforms. I hate to say it, Shad, but the conquest of Italy, which then led to years and years of fighting on the Italian peninsula. That wasted a lot of Roman money. Justinian sunk a lot of Rome's funds into that. So yeah, I think Anastasius probably better than Probus. I'll leave him there. It's hard to compare him to Claudius. Yeah, he didn't leave the... Yeah, well, we're not at Justinian yet. We'll do Justin first. We'll put Justin first, because we're not quite at Justinian. So, Justin. Well, Justin the First, he was the commander of the Imperial Guard under Anastasius, and then he was elected emperor at the age of 70. So 2 old emperors in a row. Now, Justin was a strong Orthodox Christian. A lot of his reign seems to have been involved in Christian affairs. He resolved the schism between the Western and Eastern churches. He sort of brought them back together. He obviously raised Justinian to a position of power, which, is interesting. That's probably a good thing. Yeah, and Nico points out, I wouldn't necessarily include this in my judgment of Justin's reign, but Justin was an illiterate farmer who rose to become emperor, so his life as a whole is incredibly impressive. He recognized Theodoric's rule over Italy. He continued that tradition from Zeno. And also, I think that Justin played a role in sort of establishing Eastern Rome's system of client states. Of course, that had already existed, but, we're sort of shifting to a new situation now that we're really oriented towards Constantinople. He supported Iberia, aka Georgia. He sort of also used Christianity as a tool of diplomacy. Obviously, Justin is very much overshadowed by Justinian, but I think Justin was a pretty good emperor. Everyone's talking about Justinian. But I think I'm still on Justin. I think Justin's in probably good. Probably mid. I mean, the one thing that Justin, the thing that Justin has that a lot of emperors on this list don't, is that before him was Anastasius, who was good. So, Justin came to a position that was already pretty decent, pretty good. And he went from there. So I think Justinian's probably good. Yeah. Okay. Everyone wants to talk about Justinian. Fine, we can move on to Justinian. Oh, Chad, who's the best Roman emperor then, in your opinion? Okay, Basil II. Got it. So, Justinian. There's always a lot of debate over Justinian. I gotta be honest. Now, I think, you can't put Justinian lower. Well, Justinian's obviously a great emperor, right? He's near the top. I lean towards the more negative impression of Justinian. I think he's a complicated character. There's so much good he did. There's also some bad. I frankly think Justinian overextended. He overextended Rome's resources. And the reconquest of the Italian peninsula led to a long... just a lot of warfare, sinking of resources. Definitely was not great. But... And so I think, Justinian was not necessarily great for the future of the empire. But I think some other emperors who we've ranked highly were not necessarily great for the future of the empire. I think if you look at his reign, he also did a lot of impressive stuff. his Corpus Juris Civilis, his law code, complete revision of Roman law. Justinian absolutely knew how to select good advisors, though he sometimes took a blow to his reputation for that. Of course, he had Belisarius under him, which was a massive, massive W. Of course, the reconquest of North Africa, the reconquest of Italy, though that led to some problems down the line. He increased annual revenue, yes. There were a lot of natural disasters he had to deal with. And, of course, there was the plague, which he had to deal with. Not great. Not his fault, obviously. But that was a bad time for people in Rome anyway. Impressive building, fortifications, the Hagia Sophia, Byzantine culture and writing flourished, efficient administration. Yeah. So I think he goes in Optimus Princeps. Because I just think with his accomplishments, you can't not put him in Optimus Princeps. But I'm more critical of Justinian than a lot of you guys. You know, you guys are Justinian riders, which is fine. That's fine. That's fine. But I tend to be a little more, I guess, conservative with my opinion on these sorts of things. Oh yeah, and we're talking about Roman emperors speaking Greek. Yeah, a lot of emperors had spoken Greek for a while. Is there going to be a part 3, or am I going to be disappointed? Well, we're done with our ranking today, and there won't be a part 3 anytime soon, but down the line, I do think we will do a tier list of Byzantine emperors. I think and obviously, you know, I'm just making an arbitrary cutoff point, but I would say we are done with our Roman emperor tier list, but at some point, I think we'll definitely do our Byzantine emperor tier list. That's arbitrary, but... So yes, we'll probably do more down the line. Yes, I agree with you, Roy Dean. I think Justinian took some L's. I think he's a complicated character, but I do think he's S tier. And yeah, of course, you know, you can have a great emperor and then the successors sort of mess stuff up. There's a lot of examples of that, of course. And then, you know, Justinian also has Belisarius serving under him. Very nice. Yeah, that's a big W for Justinian. No one's talking about... Yeah, there was the Nika riot. I think, yeah. That was kind of tough. I mean, look, I understand the need to establish your rule, but massacring tens of thousands of people, not great. But I get it. I think that's a complicated situation. Yeah, well, Roy Dean, when we get to... I mean, look at some of these later emperors with these, you know, these Greek-sounding names. These names get real complicated down the line. I will say, I mean, we're done with the tier list for today, but, you know, I'm a big Heraclius fan. So whenever we get to the Byzantine tier list, Heraclius, I know he's a complex figure, you know. There's the losses to the Arabs. But I'm not necessarily saying objectively, just subjectively, I like Heraclius a lot. Justin Aleman would put He'd put Theodora up in top tier. Yeah, I mean, look, the Nika Revolt was, you know... I mean, I'm not going to support someone killing that many people, but, you know, it is what it is, I guess. Yeah, so we'll do a Byzantine Emperor tier list at some point. Great generals. We could do a tier list of generals throughout history. I mean, the only other country I'm familiar enough with to do a tier list of the leaders is probably the United States, so maybe a U.S. president's tier list at some point. I know we don't do much American history on the channel, but that would be a fun one for me personally. So yeah, we can have more tier lists in the future. Okay. We have time for one short to mid-length reaction, okay? I'm trying to make this, yeah, this is true, Rodine. American history scares the Europeans away. I'm not trying to make this live stream as long as the others, but we have time for a short reaction, okay? So here's what we're going to do. And by the way, I will post our completed tier list in the Discord after we're done with this. So join the Discord if you haven't already. Okay, we have time for a reaction. So send in your recommendations. It's not going to be Germanicus. I'm doing Germanicus. I'm doing Alexander the Great in a couple of weeks. And then after Alexander the Great, we're going to do the Germanicus series. And plus, the Germanicus series is way too long. I want something short to mid-length right now, okay? Reaction on me destroying HRE fanboys. Oh, wait. There we go. There's the reaction template. Oh, wow. Jack Rackham just released the Charles I video. Not bad at all. Ooh. Stilicho. We could do a Stilicho reaction at the moment. Battle of Salamis. We're not going to do that right now, because that's when I want to do a full proper reaction on. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, it's on the list, Roy Dean. So Subtai or Ancient Rome by OSP. Let me see. Let me take a look. Ancient India. Goodness. Yeah. Sorry, we're far into the live stream. I'm misspeaking at this point. You know what? This is a good time. Clearly, we want a lot of people are wanting some Indian history. So well, it's Indian, or you have some Genghis here. I'm feeling some more Indian history. You know, I was like, we haven't done that much. We did Ashoka. All right then. Let's do some ancient India. India it is. That is what we're going to end this live stream with. Pause. Oh my goodness. Oh, my desktop audio's off. The Opium Wars. Lol, only 5 parts. Totally have time for that. That's funny, Roy Dean. Yeah, well, I will tell you guys, I think what I want to do for the next live stream, I want to do more live reactions. So, if y'all join the Discord, link, I sent it in chat a while ago, link is in the description. If y'all join the Discord, you can send me reactions you would like me to do for the next live stream. And, you know, Discord is probably where I'm most likely to see your messages, I would say. So, yeah. All right. On to Ancient India. India by OSP. Brilliant. The Discord needs some roles. We could do roles. I don't know what roles you want, though, but yeah, I know people like that sort of thing, so we could definitely do roles. Anyway, let's... If you want to talk about the Discord, hey, join the Discord. I'll tell you that. Hello, Harry! We finished our tier list, and we've now moved on to a short reaction to end the stream. We're doing History Summarized Ancient India. Now, I'll be clear up front, this is not a topic that I know too much about. You know, I mean, if you guys are subscribers, you'll know that. This is not my area of expertise. So this is more about learning. And I like to do these reactions with you guys here in chat because it's very helpful. You know, I mean, we have some Indian viewers here, so y'all can let me know, fill in the gaps where I have questions. So, with that out of the way, let's jump into this video, and you guys can tell me if the audio levels are all right, if they're balanced fine. I think they should be, but let's do it.
Ancient Indian history feels like the halfway point between a fairy tale and a Lovecraft story. On the one hand, you
Lovecraft story? What the hell?
have fables of princes going out into the wild to seek enlightenment and guilt-ridden emperors swearing off of conquest to become legendary peacemakers, but there are also entire cosmologies simply spoken into existence, and a Bronze Age civilization about a millennium ahead of the rest of the world that just fades into nothingness. And the rest of Indian history is like this too. It's so large and diverse, but almost like a jigsaw puzzle, every piece still fits together into one cohesive whole. And we can see the outlines of this big picture of India back in the earliest sparks of civilization. So, to wind back the clock and see where India got...
Okay, this is good. We're going real far back, which I think is good because my knowledge of India and Indian history is so low that, you know, you could drop me really at any point into Indian history, and I would really not be able to tell you what was going on, so I start right from the beginning. And plus, we've also done the Ashoka reaction, so jumping around a little bit. That guy in the Discord dissing Justinian's about to feel my fury. I haven't been keeping up with the, Yeah, y'all are off on the Discord right now. Alright, well, I'm going back to India.
got its start, let's do some history. This video is brought to you by Audible. More on that later. Our earliest evidence of Indian civilization is a string of settlements along the Indus River Valley in the 2 and 3000s BC. And as far as Bronze Age civilization...
Indus River Valley civilization! Woo! Woo! Big Indus River Valley civilization fan. I mean, one of the oldest civilizations out there, eh? Harry says he knows a bit about India because we used to own it, referring to the UK. Well, yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, my friend. It probably feels interesting to our Indian viewers here, as Shad is describing. The cradle of civilization, or as Zod puts it, the cradle of civilization.
Go, the Indus Valley is by far the raddest. The floodplain was easy to cultivate and build on, so the society that sprung up was startlingly well urbanized. In the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, excavated by the British in the 18 and 1900s, we've found standardized building bricks, streets laid out on a grid system to catch the breeze and cool down the city, with built-in sewage systems and massive public baths. Centuries before the pyramids of Giza, India had urban planning that wouldn't be beat until the Greeks and Romans some 2,000 years later. And the construction quality seems to show that the people of the Indus Valley had been...
They were building those urbanized, walkable communities, eh? We can't even do that these days in the United States.
Refining this system for a while. As the rest of the Bronze Age civilizations were blowing money on temples and palaces, the Indus Valley had long since made great public works and figured out zoning laws. And they weren't an insular civilization either. Their trade networks with Mesopotamia were so speedy that they could import fish from the Arabian Sea. Plus, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa aren't exactly neighbors, so the parallels between them imply a kind of overarching government. But we're clueless as to what, partially because we can't decipher their writing. And the craziest part is that we've hardly found any weapons anywhere. As far as we can tell, they were totally peaceful. But that's the Bronze Age for you. Everything feels confusing, atemporal, and kind of Lovecraftian, and it all goes...
They keep using the word Lovecraftian to describe ancient India. That is a very odd descriptor. Lovecraftian. Now, if you mean Lovecraftian in the thing that Lovecraft would have feared the most, being AKA non-white people, then you'd be right on that. Well, what did Lovecraftian fear as much as, you know, the ancient horrors of the mind? Brown people. That's what he feared as much.
Poof just as weirdly as it first appears. So at some point between the 17 and 1500s, the Indus Valley civilization slowly disappeared for reasons that we can really only guess at. The two most likely options are that the soil eventually lost its nutrients and stopped yielding crops after a millennium or so, or that an earthquake altered the course of the river and dried up several tributaries. Whatever the case, it seems that the people of the Indus Valley ventured further into the peninsula and eventually settled in the far south. So the valley's ruins lay hidden until British grave robbers rolled up.
There's Harry and the British arriving.
In the 1800s and used the stones as ballast for a railway project. Stay classy, Britain. But our story continues in the centuries after the Indus Valley civilization with the slow migration of the Indo-Aryans from Central Asia. Quick aside, that label's become kinda controversial in the past century for reasons that are wholly unrelated to Indian history, so I'll be using that term for its intended historical meaning. Instead of prolific builders, the Aryans were storytellers, and they're often known as the Vedic peoples after their holy scriptures called the Vedas. These were a series of stories including everything from big cosmology down to
and I mean, these I have heard of course.
Aspects of their own daily life, and they were all retold as hymns being memorized and perfected to the very syllables. These divine hymns form much of the basis of Hinduism, both as a religion and more broadly as a foundation of ancient Indian culture.
It's interesting how plants managed to enslave humanity with agriculture and spread across the planet. That's a real curious perspective, Roy Dean. I've never heard it phrased that way. Want to mention the Mauryan or Gupta empires? Pretty great. I mean, we've talked a little bit about them in the past, but not really the Gupta empires. We talked about Ashoka. Oh.
Historically, Hinduism is quite unique because of its continuity from ancient origins to widespread modern practice. That's cool, but also extremely nuanced and complex, so I'm gonna move right along to the next core aspect of Indo-Aryan culture,
Okay, and here's a question for Shad, / anyone else who knows about this. What is the religious breakdown of India like today? I know Hinduism's very popular, but what is the breakdown? I'm very curious. Mostly Hindu? Okay. Then Islam, and then everyone else. Let me see. Yeah. 2011 census. About 80% Hindu, 14% Islam, 2% Christian, 1.7% Sikh, 0.7% Buddhism, 0.4% Jainism. Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. Hinduism by far the most popular, then Islam already way behind, and then everything else way behind. There's all sorts of people here. I mean, yeah, it's a big country. Islam is rising. Yeah, well, Islam is growing around the world. I don't know if it's specifically growing in India, but it's growing in many different countries.
caste system. Great.
Uh-oh,
When
caste
the Aryans
system.
came across the native Adivasi people, they maintained political stability via a strict social hierarchy, with the Aryans at the top and everybody else below them. A story we've seen many times on this channel. But as the Aryans and the Adivasi mixed over the centuries, the system later stratified.
Yeah, I don't know about that, Harry. I don't think the Indians would accept that logic. The caste system had a very interesting history. Okay. All right. Well, Shad, you can prepare your your essay on the caste system, and I'll keep going with this reaction.
By profession rather than by ethnic group. At the top were the Brahmin priests, then the Kshatriya.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying, Harry. You don't agree. It's silly. Okay. Got it.
Lords and warriors, the Vaisya merchants and farmers, the Shudra laborers, and the subcaste untouchables who were fully ostracized by society. The big yikes here is that a social hierarchy based on class rather than race is malleable to whomever is in charge. So the caste system has survived the rise and fall of empires to systematically oppress the Indian people for basically 3,000 years. So just keep that in the back of your minds for the...
Very interesting. So a class-based... When it originally came around with the introduction of Hinduism, it wasn't really oppressive in nature at the time. No caste was superior to anyone else, and people could move between castes. It's more of a way to classify different professions. Okay, interesting. You know, when I think about a caste, you know, there's interesting examples of this. You know, I think of, and I think this is kind of maybe a controversial example, but if we look at, say, Rwanda, and we look at the Hutu and the Tutsi, to my understanding, before the Europeans, I believe the Belgians arrived, Hutu and Tutsi was more of a social/class distinction than a basic racial distinction. And that changed after the Europeans arrived. And of course, we know where that led. So that's something that comes to my mind. Anyway, to the Indian caste system, with the priests and kings at the top and lower professions at the bottom, but they can move up. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, like, we talk about the explicit caste system in India, but there have been types of caste systems in many different countries at many different times. I mean, we talk about the European feudal system, maybe not as explicitly, but in many ways. You had different classes, professions with specific rights, you know? Different legal rights and all that kind of business. The system became what is known today with the introduction of the laws of Manusmriti by the man himself. Set in stone the fact that the Brahmins were at the top and restricted moving between castes. Even the ancient, yeah, a lot of different countries and cultures over time have had caste systems. India's become sort of known for it, maybe because it was particularly restrictive, or maybe because it lasted for so long. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, a lot of different countries have had caste systems. Or, you know, I mean, at the end of it, a caste system in many ways generally is just a sort of professional or social hierarchy. And it could be more strict or less strict, you know? And you can look at many countries throughout time. I mentioned the European feudal order. And there are lots of examples of people being stuck in their specific profession or social class and not being able to move. But yeah, it's interesting. The caste system kind of stopped being what it was originally meant to be. Manusmriti fashioned himself as a great saint. Wow, how about that? The Brits had the biggest empire, so I would say the more British, the bigger, not American. Yeah, the Brits had a very big empire at one point. Anyway, back to this video. Some interesting stuff from Shad about the caste system. Very fascinating.
Entirety of Indian history, and let's swiftly move along. As the Vedic tradition grew and evolved in the first millennium BC, a new wave of philosophical thinking cropped up via a series of texts called the Upanishads. Its name comes from the Sanskrit for sitting down near, as a student would sit by their mentor while receiving divine knowledge through a discussion of philosophy. Similar to the Analects of Confucius or the Tao Te Ching, the Upanishads are presented as a series of brief teachings. The early ones appear along the four Vedas, but many Upanishads were composed and added later. So whereas the Vedas form the basis of Indian religion and mythology, the Upanishads are the core of Indian philosophy. It's here that we get the first mentions of topics from the cycle of reincarnation to our duties as people and the consequences of our actions, as well as our sense of self within the greater totality of the universe. It's a lot of terms, I know, but the Upanishads are as broad as they are dense, and there is a lot to unpack there. The big mind melt at the end is that our localized self, Atman, is really made up of the same stuff as the big cosmic everything of Brahman, and when we realize that we're all the same, our Atman returns to Brahman like a drop of water returning to an ocean. Aside from the big metaphysics, there's so much
Interesting stuff, I suppose. Still has 12 colonies. What, the UK? Yeah. Which ones? I mean, Britain still holds on to some overseas territory. Primarily a lot of smaller islands. But, of course, I mean, the vast majority of the British Empire has been decolonized at this point. The Falklands, or I don't know if that exactly counts as a colony, but obviously the UK had some beef with Argentina over that a couple decades ago. British Virgin Islands, I don't know if that would count as a colony. The thing is, people don't usually call overseas territories colonies these days. They just call them like overseas territories or whatever. I wonder if Indians can understand similar ancient texts. Well, Shad can tell you. There you go. Sanskrit is taught in schools. I hated it, never paid any attention, so I can't. Shad, no!
to learn from the Upanishads, and philosophers from across time have lavished praise for both their sincerity of tone and their depth of wisdom. So let's see, theology, philosophy, aha! We've also got to talk about the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Much like the Iliad and the Odyssey, these two big Indian epics blend fact and myth in a way that isn't historical, but is indicative of the world as the ancients envisioned it. It's a neat switch of perspectives. The truth here isn't in facts and dates of the wars being recorded, but rather the divine elements of the stories help frame the human philosophical truths at the core of both of these epics. Now, that said, if some long books are doorstops, then the Mahabharata is the entire door. It's the story of a...
Yeesh! Look at that length! Let me go back. Iliad, 15,000. Odyssey, 12,000. Mahabharata, 200,000. My goodness! Shad talking about immigration in India. States have been trying to provide them with shelters and food. Yeah. Though, I mean, if you look at Europe and the United States, or I guess, well, I don't know. We're comparing it to Europe. You know, there's obviously a bit of a split between, you know, some states taking care of immigrants, some states not. You know, anti-immigrant parties, the people maybe not like it. So, you know, I mean, you have plenty of that kind of stuff in other countries, in the West, I guess, as well. But it's obviously very controversial in a lot of European countries and of course, North American countries. There's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. Majority of our empire is gone because of America's decolonization policy. Yeah, well, during and following World War II, I mean, there was already a move towards decolonization, and the United States generally encouraged Britain and France and pushed them towards collapsing their colonial empires. Though, of course, it's a little more complicated than that. And of course, America had and would continue to grow its own empire. So, you know. Yeah, and as Shad's pointing out, a lot of countries who participated in World War II took a real hit. Now, some didn't, the United States, for example, but a lot of these European countries were not having a good time. So they were struggling to maintain their colonial empires anyway, and then there's a conflagration of other factors. Yeah, that is true, Roy Dean. The closer you get to modern times, the more eggshells you walk when forming opinions on history. I mean, I try to, when I talk about modern history or even politics when it intersects with history, I try to maintain the same attitude that I always do. I mean, I don't want to be walking on eggshells, but, people can get very invested in modern history. They are Hippocrates as compared to hypocrites. German occupation was no joke, especially if your country didn't have any colonies to begin with. Yeah, a lot of European countries were suffering during World War II. And, of course, you can point to a lot of countries that suffered a lot more than Britain did. But even Britain took a big financial and human cost from the Second World War, even if it wasn't as much as a lot of these other countries. Countries that were occupied by the Germans, or countries like the Soviet Union, which absolutely threw men at the problem. I mean, they lost so many men, so many soldiers. So, but yeah, a lot of European countries had a hard time following the Second World War.
Is the entire door. It's the story of a great succession crisis and a subsequent war sometime around the 14th century BC, and it is just loaded with deities front to back. But the most famous section of the story, the Bhagavad Gita, narrows in on the internal struggle of the hero Arjuna to do his duty even when it's difficult. None of us will fight alongside literal gods in a giant succession crisis. I mean, well, probably, but all of us will struggle to do the right thing.
I think it's fair to say Germany and the Soviet Union were worst hit after World War II. I don't know. I mean, first off, it's kind of tough to say Germany because they started the war in the first place, but I think Poland probably. I mean, it's difficult because you look at absolute numbers versus percentages, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but I think Poland, China, some of these other Eastern European countries, some of these Balkan countries took really incredibly high casualty rates. You know what I mean? Of course, Germany was in a unique situation because it was split up between these foreign powers. But once again, that's because Germany was a unique situation, compared to these other countries. They were the one that had started the war in the first place. But yeah, I don't know. I think, and chat is saying the same thing. Poland enters the chat. When you talk about who got screwed worse by the Second World War, Poland is probably one of the first countries you would bring up. And then, the Soviet Union, just not in terms of percentages, but in terms of absolute numbers, the Soviet Union had immense casualties. So did China. If you're talking about, just absolute numbers, not necessarily percentages, then China would come up as well. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, right? So I can't say that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Germany was bombed very heavily, suffered high casualties. But I mean, you can look at the destruction upon a country like Poland. I mean, it's not a competition. You know what I mean? Who was damaged the most by World War II? You know. The point I was making, because we came to this because we were talking about decolonization. Just the point I was making was that a lot of countries who participated in World War II had a lot of their citizens killed, were bombed, or destroyed in other ways, or took big financial blows. And so that contributed to decolonization. Now, there were some countries who recovered better than others, and there were some countries, like the United States, who came out better than they had gone in, but generally, you know, the war was pretty tough for a lot of different countries. Anyway, back to India.
Likely a lot of times. I, for instance, know that it's irresponsible to monopolize this channel for Roman history memes, but that doesn't mean that I'm not tempted. I'm getting off topic. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata are clearly some of humanity's most influential literature. Between the epics, the Upanishads, and the Vedas, it's evident just how much of Indian culture derives from these core texts. I'll be fully honest, when I started researching this, I really did think that I was making a history video, but now here I am realizing I've just made a giant book report.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a history video, because it's called History Summarized, but this is far more about the mythology and the literature of ancient India. Though, it looks like we're getting more history after this point. I mean, that stuff's certainly interesting, but, you know, especially when we're talking about sort of ancient Indian literature and mythology, yeah, I don't have much to say. You know, I don't know anything about it. I can't give much commentary. 2 of 3 soldiers were from the UK. In what context? 2 of 3 soldiers in the British Army were from the UK? I think that might be what you're saying. Yeah, I don't know, Roy Dean. I this is something I would need to find numbers to back up. It's not my area of expertise, so I couldn't argue either way. But like I said, I'm not sure if it necessarily... Like, it's not a competition who had it worse, you know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and as Zod's is saying, Ethan, every country suffered badly during World War II, and then America joins the chat. Well, that's always the exception, because, I mean, the Soviet Union would also become this major powerhouse, but it was hit hard by the Second World War, and it had to recover. America didn't have to recover. World War II was part of its way up, you know, so it is, you know, an exception. Anyway, back to India. I'm doing this reaction to ancient Indian history while simultaneously doing, you know, chatting with y'all about World War II now. Hey, maybe we should do some World War II content on the channel. I have not done any of that. I don't think we've done any of that. Or, well, we touched on it in a couple of videos. Sweet, yeah. Well, we have some of these countries who maybe didn't get involved in the conflict. Yeah, America lost a lot of lives in the war. Absolutely true. Though I will say America's casualty rate is lower than a lot of other countries. But absolutely, you don't want to ignore the casualty rate. But the point I'm making was that America, you know, World War II sort of shot America up in terms of its financial and political power. Anyway.
Ah, well, you take the sources you can get. And unfortunately, what we have in an overflowing font of ancient literature, we lack in most other forms of historical documentation for a good several centuries. But the picture gets a lot clearer once we hit the 600s through 300s BC, as we have archaeological and written evidence for loose
Mahajanapadas. Got it.
collection of independent states and kingdoms across northeast India. Researchers have found large cities and dense fortifications, as well as new forms of poetry and metallurgy, and the development of Brahmi writing. Among these 16...
Good try, I guess. You don't have to say that. It wasn't a good try. Mahajanapadas. Oh, Jesus. Like, don't come to me with non-English pronunciation. It's just not gonna go well.
Mahajanapadas, as they're snappily known, and as I'm sure I've horribly mispronounced.
Wait, he said it. Well, this is another American, so I don't know if he pronounced it well.
16 Mahajanapadas, as
Mahajanpad.
they're snappily known, and as I'm sure I've horribly mispronounced, there seems to have been some intense competition as well as interstate trade. Still not a whole lot to go on, but if it's anything like the other clusters of small independent states that we've seen in history, whether it's the Greeks and the Italians or the Maya and the Chinese warring states, it was probably pretty cool. What we do have from this political climate is a famous story of one Indian prince named Siddhartha Gautama.
Ooh, Siddhartha. Now how about that? That's a name that we're familiar with.
For his entire life, this prince was kept secluded in a palace by his parents, knowing nothing but luxury, health, and joy. But one day he asked to leave his palace and go see the outside world, and was horrified to see people who were sick, gross, and worse, dying. So he flipped out over the sudden and devastating realization of humanity's suffering and of his own impending mortality, and he camped out in the middle of the woods for a month, refusing to leave until he either died or figured out a way to end all human suffering. Luckily for him, he actually got the desired outcome and achieved the enlightened state of nirvana. Prince Siddhartha, now called Buddha,
yeah, great band.
realized that the ideal life was the middle path between extravagance and asceticism, where all outward suffering could be conquered solely through a complete mastery of the self. And just like that, bada bing, bada eightfold path, we've got a shiny new religion. But before we wrap this...
Hey, yeah, how about that? You know, some guy has some good ideas. Bang, we have a new religion. How about that? And, you know, we talk about the emergence of Buddhism. We talked about this in the reaction to the Battle of Talis, which we did about a week ago. It's interesting how, of course, it emerges in India, and then Buddhism spreads, and then nowadays Buddhism is not that popular in India. I am interesting. Maybe Shad can answer this. Of course, Hinduism is far more popular. The majority of the population, only a very small percentage, is Buddhist. But is there some... is there like other Buddhist influence on India today in the culture or the history, or has a lot of it been sort of paved over by other influences? I'm very interested, since, of course, Buddhism emerged here. Oh, okay. Interesting, Shad.
The story up, we've
a lot of influence and respect for Buddhism. Okay, I mean, that's what I would guess, but of course I don't really know, given that, you know, I'm not that familiar with, modern day India either, you know. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We've got to talk about some wars. After Alexander the Far From Home failed to push past the...
Alexander the Far From Home. Now, I'm always amazed at the extent of Alexander's conquests. I always forget, because I think of him, you know, you think of Macedonia and Greece and the Middle East. I always forget he pushed right up to India. Truly incredible. And like I said, you can wait a couple of weeks and we'll be doing our Alexander the Great reaction. Maybe a little bit sooner if I can move some stuff around. I don't know. We've got... I'm not going to look at my calendar right now because, you know, we've got this up on stream, but we've got the Sengoku Jidai series to finish. We've got some other stuff to do. But yeah, then Alexander. And then, what was I going to say? Oh man, I'm getting so tired now. I totally forgot what I was going to say. Oh, and then Germanicus afterwards. That's what I was going to say. Average Greek pension policy. March till India and maybe you'll get something. Oh, man. That's a good comment. That is a good comment. Yeah, average Greek pension policy. So true, so true. Germany's like, that's too generous. Cut down on that. Oh, man.
Indus River and decided to call it quits and go home, an exiled Kshatriya named Chandragupta took advantage of the...
Hey, Chandragupta! Hey, there he is. Yeah, also, looking at chat, I'm going to be honest, Harry, I don't think... I'm speaking as one of America's former colonies, America, and I think Shad can agree as another one of Britain. Jesus. Speaking of one of Britain's former colonies, America, and I'm sure Shad can agree, is another one of Britain's former colonies. Yeah, we're not interested in rejoining. I think we're... I mean, India's doing fine on its own. It's growing fast. It's one of the biggest economies in the world. They've got lots of resources at their hands. Why? Because I think, well, you know, I think we're doing fine on our own without Britain. Plus, I mean, having a colonial empire these days, it's so passé. You know what I mean? It's a little archaic. Plus, Britain's doing fine on its own. I mean, you know, it has its struggles. It's gone through a tough time recently, but Britain's doing fine. You don't need to bring India back to the empire. I don't think that's really good for anybody. Yeah, thank you, Zods. Oh, Light trying to bring it back to Rome. Yes, anyway, Chandragupta, woo!
And conquered across northern India to found the Maurya Empire, India's first large, properly centralized state. The new empire established diplomatic ties with Hellenistic Greece as well as China, and built up considerable infrastructure within the empire itself.
Not bad.
Chandragupta was by all accounts a solid ruler, keeping a hands-off approach for his 2 decades in power and letting his people be. He died fasting in the woods, his son was pretty meh, and there was an interregnum afterwards, but then his grandson Ashoka was...
Ashoka, the one part of Indian history I know a little bit about, because we did a video on Ashoka. Interesting character. Chandra space Gupta versus Chandragupta no space. Sure, Britain is you could call them the father of the United States, but it's sort of a case where the child grows to surpass the parent in many ways. Ashoka the GOAT. You got some Ashoka fans in chat.
Was one of the coolest cats in history. Ascending to the throne in 273 BC, he conquered eastward to the coast of Kalinga, and the result was...
The UK is Philip, the US is Alexander. That's exactly right. My friend. the US is... Oh yeah, have we... Now I'm thinking, have we ever... You very well might have told me this and I've just forgotten, Roy Dean, but have we ever talked about where you're from? And don't share if you don't want to. I'm not pushing anything. But everyone always talks about their particular country, but I'm trying to remember. Okay. You are British, Roy Dean. We might have talked about this. We probably have, and I've forgotten. Bruh, everyone's British here. Well, you know, if you look at my channel analytics, like the biggest group of watchers is American, and then I think Brits are number 2. Or maybe like Canadians or something. I don't remember. No, I think it's Brits. Yeah. It's funny though, like, of the chatters, and those of you, the most devoted of you, the most active, not a lot of you are American, which is odd, because 30% of my audience is American. And then 7% is British, 3.6% is German, 3.5% Canadian, then India at 2.2%, then Australia, France. So it's US, UK, Germany, Canada, then India. So, you know, the Americans are the biggest group, but I don't see a lot of Americans talking in here. But yeah, Britain is my second biggest viewer group. And I see a lot of you self-identifying as Roman. Anyway, wait. So Roy Dean, you're British. If you don't mind me asking, Roy Dean, and once again, feel free not to share. What region or area of Britain are you from? If you don't mind, letting me know, I'm curious. Anyway, yeah, I'll let you answer that, and I'll get back to the video.
An absolute bloodbath with hundreds of thousands dead on both sides. When he heard the news, he felt really, really bad about it. So he issued a full apology throughout his empire and abandoned warfare entirely to become a Buddhist. He then worked to build trade relations and improve the lives of his people. He was super tolerant of other faiths, and he wrote extensively about his own journey to inner peace through Buddhism. That has got to be the single biggest heel-face turn in history. His life seems almost surreal, but there it is, a conqueror who felt remorse and changed his ways. Unfortunately, his successors were far less able than him, and soon pockets of the empire slipped away before the assassination of Emperor Brihadratha extinguished the Maurya.
English, Northwest London. Don't mind sharing. Okay, interesting. And that makes sense. I mean, a lot of the English population is around London, very big city. Interesting stuff.
Empire for good in 180 BC, and that's ancient.
And Harry's near Gloucester.
India, from the Indus River Valley to Ashoka the Great. What I find most amazing is the massive catalog of literature that took shape at such an early stage. It's an incredibly strong foundation that's at once diverse and cohesive, and so exquisitely preserved after nearly 3,000 years. And speaking of 3,000 years, the next chapter of Indian history is going to have to be a story for another video, because if I seriously tried to summarize that all at once, I may actually burst.
Fair enough. All right, we're done with this video. That's our final reaction for today. We can chat a little bit. So let's chat and sort of end out the stream. Roy Dean, your great-grandparents are from Poland. They were deported east by Stalin at the start of World War II and eventually immigrated, so you got a lot of Polish blood in you. Very interesting. Very interesting. Oh, yep, Zods is promoting Yorkshire, as always. Oh, yeah. Fair enough, Shad, fair enough. It is late where you are. Thank you for joining us. We finished rating up these Roman emperors. Like I said, I will put our tier list in the Discord. So if you haven't joined the Discord, please do so. There's a link to it in the description. Y'all should all subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Then you'll be able to see whenever I release a new video or announce a new live stream. You'll be able to see that. You can also see that stuff in the Discord. It's announced there. So yeah. And if you want to continue your conversations about where y'all are at in Britain, you can hop into the Discord and talk about that. Really, we have a lot of vocal Brits in the audience. Oh yeah, there's the Justinian debate in the Discord. All right. I think we're gonna phase out unless anyone has any other topics they would like to bring up. I'll give y'all a second to think about that. But if not, then I will say, when you're in the Discord, feel free to send me reactions you would like me to do during the next live stream. Because I think we're done with tier lists for now. I'd like to do more in the future. For the next live stream, I'd like to do another React live stream. And it's better if we can do sort of either a long video or a series of shorter ones. So the extra history series are good because they usually have 5 videos of about 10 minutes. And so we can do a couple of those per stream. And then we can do a stream focused around one topic. Goodbye, Roy Dean. Fuel the world how Britain is the boss, not American. Well, I think there's multiple bosses around the world. I think America's pretty powerful, but I think China is rising. And, you fast forward a couple of years and we'll have a world with a couple of sort of great powers. America being one of them, China being one of them, etc., etc. All right. Goodbye, Roy Dean. Goodbye, Zods. Goodbye, Harry. Thank you, everybody, for coming to today's stream. I had a good time ranking all of these Roman emperors. Anybody watching the VOD, leave your criticisms and comments down below. Try to be nice about it. I know we disagree on some of these emperors, but, try to be nice about it if you have a disagreement. And let me know why or the chatters in the community are wrong, because this is a joint tier list. Thank you, Rodine. Luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan. I hope so.